Hey guys, tonight we're diving into a world where lace and velvet might look romantic in paintings, but trust me, you do not want to live there. Because tonight, you are a medieval bride. And before we go any further, let's be real. You probably won't survive this. You're born into a family that sees you less as a person and more as a movable asset. If you're lucky, you're born to a modestly noble house. If you're not so lucky, you're born into royalty, which means your life is even less your own. Sounds backward? It is. The higher your station, the more political your marriage will be, and the earlier you'll be carted off in silk slippers to become someone's wife. You're not even wearing bras yet, and the adults around you are already talking about which lord's son you'll be betrothed to. They whisper in corners about dowries, land claims, bloodlines, anything except your personality or dreams. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Seriously, I don't need pity clicks. Let me know in the comments what city you're watching from and the time. It's currently 2:14 AM where I'm recording this, and the only thing awake with me is my ceiling fan and the existential dread of medieval gender roles. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're 12, maybe 13 if your father's feeling merciful. Old enough to have a vague sense of how babies happen, but not nearly old enough to consent to being part of that process. One morning, your mother brushes your hair while telling you the good news. You've been promised to a baron's second son. Your stomach twists. You've never met him. He's at least 20, probably more. She tells you it's a great match. He owns land, has a strong family name, and his uncle knows the archbishop. You nod, pretending to be thrilled, while mentally inventorying the dolls you won't be allowed to keep. There's no use crying. Your tears would stain your chemise and someone would scold you for being ungrateful. So you sit quietly while the adults plan a celebration you don't understand. You're not invited to the table where the deal is sealed. That's men's business. Instead, you're sent to embroidery lessons, where the other girls whisper about dowries like stock prices. Your dowry is essentially your price tag. Land, livestock, coins, maybe a few embroidered linens if your family wants to be fancy. You're told it's a gift, but deep down, you sense it's more of a payment for being someone else's burden. No dowry, no wedding. And no wedding means shame. If you're not married by 15, people start to ask questions. Is she sickly? Is there madness in the bloodline? Did she offend a bishop? And don't get too attached to your name either. Once you're married, you'll be wife of or lady of, depending on how many chickens your family tossed into the pot. Your identity dissolves into your husband's shadow. You don't get a say in the wedding date, what colour your dress is, or even whether the groom shows up sober. You've probably never even spoken to him. Maybe you glimpsed him at a feast once. He was the one with the patchy beard and suspicious smile. He looked at you like someone inspecting a horse. There's a historical footnote worth mentioning here. Noble girls were often betrothed as early as 7 or 8. The church said marriages couldn't be consummated until the girl was 12, but surprise! That wasn't exactly enforced. Some scholars debate whether these child marriages were just symbolic contracts until the girl reached maturity, but evidence suggests many weren't just playing house. And here's where it gets even more charming. Sometimes you're not just marrying for your father's gain, you're part of a peace treaty. 2 warring families decide to bury the hatchet, and boom, you're the shovel, your personal feelings? Not on the agenda. You're a living olive branch and everyone's counting on you not to mess it up by, say, expressing human emotions. Oh, and heaven help you if you're pretty. That only raises your value. If your eyes are large and your skin is pale, your odds of being married off early go up, not down. The medieval ideal of beauty is basically look vaguely consumptive. Any sign of a spine, too much wit, too loud a laugh can lower your marketability. There's also the fringe cases. Say your father loses favour with the king or dies in battle. Suddenly your engagement is void and you're chopped liver on the marriage market. Families that were once competing to marry you off are now politely pretending you don't exist. In some brutal cases, you're sent to a convent not out of faith, but because no one else wants you. That's right. Age 13, and you're already considered expired stock. And let's not forget, if you're not noble, your life isn't exactly better. Peasant girls marry young too, often around the same age, sometimes younger. But instead of a manor house, you're going to live in a 2-room cottage with a thatched roof and no chimney. Your husband might be a yeoman or a blacksmith, but he'll still expect obedience, fertility, and the ability to churn butter without complaint. So here you are, in your prettiest dress, standing like a porcelain statue, while your family discusses the future you don't want. You try to swallow the lump in your throat while your mother adjusts your veil and whispers, "Be strong." You nod, because what else can you do? The wedding is weeks away. There's barely time to learn how to act like a wife, whatever that means. You're told to practice walking gracefully, keeping your eyes lowered, and never ever speaking unless spoken to. There are whispered instructions about the wedding night, but no one gives real details, just euphemisms that make you feel ill. There's no law that says you must be happy. That word doesn't even really enter the conversation. Your duty is clear: obey, marry, produce. A bride, in medieval terms, is less a partner and more a hinge, connecting two doors that never quite close. Your opinions, your fears, your awkward transition from girl to womanhood, none of that what matters. And the worst part, you're not even shocked. Because every girl you know has watched this happen. You've seen older sisters disappear behind high walls and heard their muffled cries through the keyhole. You've seen your mother's tired face and learned to mimic her smile. Sleep tight. You wake up to the sound of bells. Not wedding bells, just the chapel's morning clamour summoning people to mass. But for you, every toll feels like a countdown. Your wedding day is creeping closer, and while the village is starting to buzz with preparations, you're beginning to grasp just how little this has to do with you. It's not a love story, it's a negotiation, a trade deal. You're not the main character, you're the leverage. Your father is in the great hall, laughing with your future father-in-law over mugs of ale, speaking in cheerful tones about sealing the union. They don't look at you like a daughter or a bride, they look at you like a promise made, a debt settled, a bridge to something better. If you squint, you can almost see your future husband's crest etched in your bones already. When you were little, you used to think of marriage like the court songs. You know the ones, soft voices singing about knights and maidens, stolen kisses, and roses pressed between pages. You'd picture yourself with flowers in your hair, dancing under stars, holding hands with a boy who liked your laugh. But no one's singing now. The only music you hear is the rustle of parchment as your father reviews contracts and dowry receipts. Speaking of which, dowries. Let's talk about the price of your freedom. Yours includes 3 parcels of land, 2 milk cows, and a coffer of silver coins your grandmother hoarded since before you were born. That last part took some arguing. Your father wanted to hold on to it, but the groom's side insisted. Why? Because no man wants to take on a wife unless there's a clear benefit. You are a walking investment. Your worth is calculated by your purity, your family name, and your father's willingness to sweeten the pot. Love doesn't factor into it. In fact, it's viewed with suspicion. A nobleman marrying for affection? That's peasant behaviour. In your world, marriage is about alliances, about extending one family's reach into another's territory, even if that territory is your uterus. And here's the awkward detail that no one says out loud. Your future husband doesn't want a partner. He wants an air machine. A pretty one, if possible. Young, obedient, fertile, in other words. He's not interested in your opinions or your hobbies or the song you've been humming under your breath for weeks. If he wanted conversation, he'd go to the tavern. What he wants is your silence and your womb. That sounds harsh, right? But that's the standard. Your property, but not quite. Livestock, but with more paperwork. A girl with a family name is currency, and yours is just good enough to be worth trading. Not good enough to be powerful on your own, mind you. Just enough to be useful. The best case scenario? You produce sons, plural, quickly. If not, you'll be whispered about behind tapestries and blamed for weak blood. Meanwhile, your mother is busy teaching you how to act like a proper bride. Not a happy one, a proper one. That means speaking softly, eating little, and never making eye contact with men, unless they're your husband or a priest. You practice kneeling gracefully, walking without tripping over your hem, and learning which herbs will hide your scent. Not perfume, mind you. Men say they prefer women natural, which is funny considering the number of baths they avoid. Your father warns you not to embarrass him. That's his main concern, really. Not your safety, not your future, but whether you'll represent the family well. He tells you to smile, to make a good impression, to remember your duty. You're nodding so much these days your neck might snap. There's a grim historical truth behind this performance. Marriages were often used to settle debts. Literally. If your father owed money or protection to another lord, offering you as a bride was a way to clear the books. You were cheaper than war, more durable than gold, and usually less likely to run away, though not always. Some women tried. Most didn't succeed. Some scholars argue that not all marriages were joyless transactions. There are records of medieval couples who grew fond of one another, eventually, after years of shared responsibilities and mutual boredom. But fond is not free, and growing used to captivity is not the same as choosing it. There's also a fringe case worth knowing. Some fathers rented their daughters as temporary brides to settle debts or gain favour, especially in lower noble circles. Legally, these arrangements were vague and often undocumented, but they happened. Quietly. Horribly. You'd be married in all but name, sent to another household for service and expected to act the part. If you returned at all, it would be with shame stitched into your skin. Your future husband arrives 2 days before the ceremony. You're allowed to meet him, briefly. He's older than you thought. Nearly 30, with a red face and a voice that seems too loud for the room. He calls you fair and small and comments on your hair like he's buying a hunting dog. He doesn't ask your name, he already knows it, and it bores him. That night you don't sleep. You lie in bed thinking about what will change, how everything you've ever known, your bed, your mother's voice, your favourite corner in the orchard, will be left behind. You'll belong to someone else, not metaphorically, legally. You've heard the horror stories. The girl who was married off and died a week later from injuries sustained on her wedding night. The one who was locked in a tower for refusing her husband's bed. The one who ran away and was hunted down, her feet crushed with stones for her disobedience. You tell yourself those are just stories, and you hope you're right. But deep in your bones, you already know you're not. Because being a bride in this world isn't about happiness, it's about survival. And if you're lucky, if you're really lucky, you'll make it to adulthood with your body intact and your spirit only partially shattered. The sun rises with no regard for your dread. Its rays slip through the lattice of your chamber window, landing on the woven coverlet your mother embroidered for your trousseau chest. Today is the day you become a bride, though that word feels more like a sentence than a celebration. You haven't eaten, not because of the corset, though it is tight enough to make your ribs click, but because your stomach has decided to curl in on itself. Outside your window you hear movement, laughter, horses clopping over the cobblestones, servants shouting. Someone drops a tray. This is supposed to be a joyful occasion, and from a distance it sounds like one, a festivity. But inside your small, finely furnished room, the air hangs heavy like wet wool. You're already dressed. That happened hours ago. You've been sitting still ever since, hands folded so tightly your knuckles burn. Your wedding dress is pale blue, white wasn't really a thing yet, and so stiff with brocade you can barely walk in it. Pearls are sewn into the hem, heavy and cold, each one a bead of silence. There's a veil too, of course, a long one, meant to cover your face to remind everyone that you're not quite yours anymore. A mysterious gift being handed off like a parcel, sight unseen. They made you kneel for hours in chapel last night, praying for a fruitful union. You repeated every holy word, though your mind was far away, picturing what your life might have looked like if you'd been born a boy. You could have gone falconing, or learned Latin, or gone unmarried for your entire life and no one would have batted an eye. But you weren't born lucky. Now the chamber door opens with a creak, and in steps your mother. Her face is unreadable, trained by years of expectation. She offers you a smile, the kind that's more about holding composure than feeling joy. She kisses your forehead and adjusts your veil. He'll be waiting, she says, as if that's a comfort. The ceremony takes place in the manor's private chapel. The priest is already halfway through a goblet of wine, cheeks pink, robes wrinkled. Your groom waits near the altar, surrounded by his kin, none of whom seem particularly sober. He's wearing a fur-trimmed tunic and polished boots, and he winks at you when you approach, as if you're sharing a joke. You're not. Everyone is watching. Your steps echo on the stone floor. You can feel your heartbeat in your ears, your fingers, your knees. The priest begins his Latin incantations, voice steady, though you only catch bits and pieces. Consent, holy sacrament, fruitful union. Your groom grips your hand. His palm is sweaty, his ring slides roughly onto your finger, and when it's your turn to return the favour, you fumble slightly and someone chuckles from the back. Then the moment. The kiss. It's brief, but his lips are chapped, and his breath smells like mead and garlic. You try not to wince. You're led from the chapel to the hall where a feast is already in full swing. People cheer, toast, toss petals. You smile, or at least your face does. Historically, these marriages were often formalities more than festivities. The actual celebration varied wildly based on class. For royalty and nobles, the wedding was a public spectacle designed to show power and unity. For commoners, it could be as simple as a mutual agreement witnessed by neighbours. But regardless of grandeur, the same expectations awaited. A woman handed off like property, exchanged for goods, land or favour. And speaking of favours, your new husband doesn't waste time asserting his ownership. By the time the feast ends, he's tugging you toward the chamber that's been specially prepared. You don't get much say. There's no romantic whispering, no gentle reassurance, just the creak of old floorboards, the rustle of silk, and a silent prayer that he's too drunk to do much. You've heard whispers of consummation ceremonies, where wedding beds are watched, sheets inspected for blood, crowds waiting outside to cheer the proof of your virginity. In your case, they didn't go that far, but the expectation is still clear. This night seals the deal. No blood means no proof, and no proof means scandal. And scandal is dangerous, especially for you. Some historians argue that these traditions, though brutal, were a form of legitimacy protection. Inheritance depended on pure lines, and verifying a bride's virginity was the surest way to ensure no rival claims. But of course there were no virginity tests for grooms. Shocking, right? You sit on the edge of the massive canopy bed, your skin prickling despite the fire in the hearth. Your husband is undressing with zero ceremony, already halfway through pulling off his boots. He mutters something about "finally" and downs another gulp of wine. You can't meet his eyes. What happens next isn't violent exactly, not in the way some stories go. But it's not tender either. It's awkward, one-sided and quick. You bite your lip to keep from crying, not because of the pain, though there is some, but because you know this is just the beginning. Night one of countless nights. You stare at the ceiling until he falls asleep beside you, snoring. And then you lie there, wide awake. The fire has died down. The only sound is the wind brushing the stone walls. You touch your ring, feel its weight. You think of home, of your old bed, your favourite tree in the orchard, the carved doll you weren't allowed to bring. This is your life now. A man you barely know, in a bed you didn't choose, in a house that echoes with the footsteps of servants who don't yet know your name. You are a wife. That word sits on your chest like a stone. Outside, the guests are still drinking, laughing, dancing. You wonder if anyone is thinking about you, really thinking about you, or if you've already become just another married girl, checked off the ledger, filed away. You remember your mother's voice this morning. He'll be waiting. He was, and now he's here, breathing loudly beside you, one arm thrown over your waist like a claim. Welcome to your nightmare. The wedding is over. The feast has ended, the toasts have run dry, and the guests have either staggered to their chambers or into the hayloft, depending on rank and sobriety. You are officially a wife, which, as it turns out, feels a lot like being a well-decorated hostage. The celebration wasn't for you, it never was. It was for your families, your new husband, and the idea of a marriage. You were simply the centerpiece, polished and posed. This morning your chamber is thick with the scent of wine, sweat and wilted flowers. Your husband is still asleep, sprawled across the bed like he owns every corner of it, and technically he does. You quietly slip out from under the covers, feet cold against the stone floor. You're careful not to wake him, as if silence might buy you a few moments of peace. Your maid finds you by the window and begins brushing your hair without a word. She's a few years older, born into service, and probably knows more about marriage than you do. You want to ask her if it gets better. If any woman truly feels at home in a house that isn't hers with a man she barely knows, but you stay quiet. Questions like that don't have safe answers. You're expected to make your first formal appearance today as a wife, not just in the household, but before the village, the court and the estate's watchful eyes. There's a ritual walk, a sort of parade where the new couple is shown off like prize livestock. You're told to smile, to look grateful, to wave if appropriate, as if your existence has now been upgraded. You didn't get promoted, you got rebranded. And let's not forget, in noble households, appearances were everything. You might feel hollow, but your posture needs to be flawless. Your lips rosy, your skin powdered. You're the new lady of the manor now, and everyone from the cook to the stable boy will be judging you. Is she strong enough to manage the household? Is she fertile? Does she seem docile? Does she laugh too easily, or not at all? Historically, noble women had one job above all others: maintain the image of family honour. That included producing heirs, hosting guests, managing servants, and keeping your husband's public and private affairs in order. Love was not part of the job description. If it happened, if it dared to happen, it was seen as a happy accident, not a requirement. You step outside into the courtyard, hand in hand with your new husband, who seems to have recovered quickly from last night's celebration. He waves to the crowd and jokes with the men-at-arms while you nod politely and avoid meeting anyone's eyes for too long. Some of the villagers have brought gifts: cheese, baked tarts, herbs. It's customary, it's polite, it's meant to be a sign of goodwill. But you can't help but feel like you're being inspected. The children watch you with wide eyes, the girls especially. They whisper behind baskets, wondering what kind of lady you'll be. You want to tell them to run, to enjoy their games, their scraped knees, their freedom. Because one day, not long from now, they'll be the ones wrapped in heavy silk, walking through this same courtyard with a stranger at their side. After the formalities, you're led into the Great Hall. It's cooler in here, with tapestries lining the stone walls and a pair of hounds dozing near the hearth. The steward introduces you to the senior household staff, the cook, the head maid, the chaplain, the reeve. These people will report to you now, or rather, they'll pretend to. In reality, they answer to your husband. You're a symbolic manager, a figurehead, allowed to oversee the cheese inventory perhaps, but not the estate books. Still, you smile and play your part. You ask polite questions, nod at the appropriate times, and pretend not to notice how the men rarely make eye contact. You're not their equal. You're a wife. That title opens doors and locks cages all at once. Later, while the household bustles with the clean-up from yesterday's feast, your husband disappears, off to inspect the grounds or confer with his steward. No one thinks to tell you where he's gone. You sit alone in your new solar, fingers tracing the embroidery on the cushion beside you. The room smells of lavender and beeswax, with stained glass windows filtering in fractured light. It's beautiful, and it feels nothing like home. There's a growing awareness inside you now, an understanding that you've crossed into something you can't undo. The last 24 hours have been a blur of lace, incense, and whispered instructions. You feel like you've been passed through a gate that only swings one way. In medieval culture, the bride's experience during and immediately after the wedding was rarely documented in her own voice. Diaries were scarce. And even among the literate few, most women's personal feelings were filtered through male scribes, priests, or chroniclers. We know more about the politics behind marriages than we do about what the brides thought of them, which tells you a lot. There's an old story you remember from your childhood about a noblewoman who, on her wedding day, locked herself in the chapel and refused to come out until her father swore she could marry a man of her choosing. The story ends with her triumphant wedding to a brave knight who rescues her from misery. It's told as a romance. But now you wonder, how did she lock the door from the inside? Who brought her food? Who believed her when she said no? Fringe histories suggest that some young brides did resist. There are scattered records of girls fleeing to convents to escape unwanted matches. A few were helped by the sympathetic clergy. Others were dragged back and punished, sometimes publicly. You think of these girls now, and the fire that must have burned in them. Where was that fire when you needed it? By sunset, your husband returns. He's in a good mood, probably pleased by the success of the day. He calls you wife now, with a tone that lands somewhere between affection and ownership. You respond with a small smile. You've learned already that silence is often safer than speaking. He eats dinner by the hearth, tearing into roasted pheasant while dictating a letter to his scribe. You're seated nearby, offered a smaller portion on a pewter plate. It tastes fine. It might as well be ashes. Before bed, he reaches for you again, and you freeze for just a moment, just long enough for him to notice. He laughs it off, muttering something about skittishness, then proceeds as if the entire day hasn't been a slow-motion robbery of your agency. You close your eyes and pretend the canopy above you is the night sky. That somewhere out there, in some faraway land, there's a girl who said no and meant it, and the world listened. But that's not your story. Not yet. You wake before the sun. The sky outside your windows is still a deep bruise of purple and grey, but inside your chamber, the servants are already stirring. A soft knock, then the door creaks open, and in comes your maid carrying warm water in a copper basin and a towel that smells faintly of thyme. You sit up, disoriented. Your body aches in ways that make you feel both older and younger than your years. There's a soreness, weight in your limbs, like your bones are starting to understand the future ahead of them. The maid helps you wash, then laces up a new gown, darker and more sombre than your wedding dress. Now that the ceremony is over, you're expected to dress like a married woman. No more pastel silks or playful embroidery. Your sleeves are longer, your neckline higher, your presence more subdued. You've stepped into a new role, one that comes with layers, literal and figurative, meant to wrap you up and quiet you down. Today you're to visit the parish priest with your husband. It's customary, a post-wedding blessing to reinforce the idea that your union wasn't just a legal matter, but a holy one. You walk beside him down the village path, your feet crunching on gravel. He makes small talk about weather, horses, and taxes. You nod when appropriate, hands folded neatly at your waist. You are above all display material now, a visible extension of his household, of his success. Your feelings are a private inconvenience, not for public consumption. The priest greets you with a wide smile and a string of Latin phrases you can't fully follow. He places his hands on your heads, murmurs something about fruitfulness, and sprinkles holy water across your joined fingers. The gesture is symbolic. Your real duties begin tonight, or rather they began last night. The church wants to make sure your soul's in the right place. Your body? That's already spoken for. Now here's a twist of medieval logic. The church technically believed in consent. Canon law said both bride and groom had to agree to the union of their own free will, but in practice, that consent was often extracted with pressure, timber-walnuts or subtle threats. Girls as young as 12 were considered old enough to decide their future, provided they agreed in front of witnesses. If you hesitated or cried, that was seen as shyness. If you begged, you were being dramatic. Only silence was taken as true consent, and you were very, very silent. You return to the manor by midday, just in time to be informed that your husband's uncle is coming for supper. He's bringing his wife and their 2 sons. You've never met them. That means you have about 3 hours to prepare for yet another evening of performative normalcy. You're briefed on their status, their preferences, their history with your new family. You nod, take notes, rehearse your smiles. At the table, the uncle is loud and red-faced, clearly fond of wine and his own opinions. His wife is quiet, her eyes moving quickly from person to person like she's searching for a trapdoor. The sons are boisterous and full of questions. They ask how many children you plan to have, whether you've bled yet, whether you like being married. You want to slide under the table and vanish. Instead, you laugh softly and answer in phrases that sound delicate but say nothing. Later that night, you catch a look between your husband and his uncle. It's brief, almost casual, but it makes your skin prickle. The uncle mentions something about your dowry again, how generous it was, how fortunate his nephew is. Your husband agrees, not looking at you, and he does. You could be a parcel of land, a new plough, or a fine hound, a good acquisition. And here's where it gets murky. Marriages in this time weren't just political, they were also frequently tangled up in the strange, flexible web of canon law. Did you know it was legal to marry your cousin in many cases? The church had rules against consanguinity, basically marrying someone too closely related, but those rules shifted constantly, depending on who needed what. If the king needed his niece to marry the duke's second cousin to seal a treaty, suddenly that union was fine, dispensation granted. God winks. You think of that now, sitting quietly in the solar, listening to your husband and his uncle discuss estate matters. It hits you that this isn't just your life, it's part of a larger game, a chessboard where you're a pawn made of velvet and virtue, and pawns don't get to move unless someone else lifts them. As evening deepens, the manor quiets down again. The uncle and his family have taken guest chambers down the hall. Your husband seems more relaxed than usual, pleased maybe that things are going according to plan. He reaches for your hand and says, "You did well today," like you're a trained dog who didn't bark during the ceremony. He doesn't seem cruel, not exactly, just unaware, or maybe too steeped in his own assumptions to realise that kindness is not the same thing as fairness. He believes he's a good man. After all, he hasn't hit you. He gave you fine jewellery. He told the servants to treat you with respect. What more could you possibly want? There's a strange kind of invisibility in being someone's wife. You're seen everywhere, watched constantly, but rarely looked at. People see your dress, your posture, your new name, but the you underneath. She's quietly slipping further and further away, and it's not like you can go home. That option vanished the second the priest said his final blessing. If you tried to leave, if you did run, your family would be the ones punished. Your father could lose land, your brothers might lose rank, your sisters might be considered tainted for marriage. You're not just stuck here for your own sake, you're trapped for theirs too, so you play your part, day after day, Wife, hostess, lady. You practice holding your fork a certain way. You memorize the names of distant cousins you may one day need to impress. You learn to laugh just enough, but never too loudly. Your lessons from childhood weren't about reading or writing. They were about silence, grace under pressure, how to nod without agreeing, how to make a cage look like a throne. In bed that night, your husband sleeps peacefully. You lie awake staring at the embroidered canopy overhead. A cluster of roses surrounds a stitched dove, its wings spread as if in flight. The needlework is perfect, not a thread out of place. You wonder how long it took the girl who stitched it to learn her craft. You wonder if she was married, if she was happy, if she looked up from her sewing one day and realised she'd sewn a version of herself into someone else's life. You close your eyes and try not to count the years ahead. The first time you're corrected in public, it happens so quickly you barely understand what's happened. You're seated at a long table in the great hall during a midday meal. Roasted goose, hard cheese and boiled vegetables, and you make an offhand remark about the new steward's wife being from the southern shires. Your husband laughs, not unkindly, and says, "No, dear, she's from the east." Then he pats your hand and adds, "Leave the talking to me." Everyone chuckles. It's supposed to be charming, light-hearted. You force a smile and lower your eyes, cheeks burning. The conversation moves on without you. This is your first lesson in the rules of medieval matrimony. Once you say "I do," it's not really "I love" or "I choose," it's "I obey." And it's not a metaphor. Your vows literally require obedience. Your husband is the head of the house, the voice of reason, the arm of God. You're the echo. A silent partner in a very loud arrangement. At first, you try to take the correction in stride. You tell yourself it's cultural, expected, something you'll get used to. Everyone plays a role, right? But as the days stretch into weeks, you begin to feel the edges of your world shrinking. Conversations you once would have joined now feel like closed doors. Men discuss estate matters over maps and goblets while you're quietly escorted to the garden with the steward's wife and the cook's sister to talk about poultry, linens, and weather. And here's the twist, your husband isn't even particularly cruel. Not like the stories you've heard of other girls married to men with fists and tempers and chains. Your husband is respected, which just means his control is polite, systematic, and impossible to challenge without sounding hysterical. You start to realise how deep this hierarchy runs. You were never taught to lead, only to follow gracefully. Even now, when you try to speak confidently to the servants or suggest something to the reeve, you feel the pushback. Not overt, just quiet resistance, like people smiling too politely or saying, "Of course, my lady," and then going to ask your husband what he really wants. It's not just you, it's the entire system. Historically, once a woman married, she entered into what was called coverture, a legal doctrine that meant her identity was absorbed into her husband's. She couldn't own property independently, couldn't sue, couldn't enter contracts. She didn't even exist legally on her own. She was, in every sense, covered, hidden beneath her husband's legal and moral authority. So when you sit in chapel and the priest speaks of man and wife becoming one flesh, he isn't speaking poetically. He means you are one person now, and he's the one. One day, while walking through the orchard behind the manor, you come across a servant girl bent over, collecting fallen apples. She's younger than you, maybe by a year or two, with calloused hands and dirt smudged across her brow. You kneel to help her without thinking, and she looks at you in shock. "You shouldn't," she whispers. "That's not for you to do." You blink, then set the apple down. She gathers the rest in silence. You're not even allowed to help anymore. Your life has become one long list of invisible fences. You can't pick fruit. You can't speak first in a room full of men. You can't write letters without approval. You can't eat until your husband does. You can't ride your horse alone anymore, even though you've been doing it since you were 8. And if you're ever tempted to push back, the world will respond with confused condescension. "Why are you upset? You have everything. A good husband, a warm home, a fine title." As if freedom doesn't count. That's the thing about this new cage. You're expected to decorate it, to hang your own tapestries and polish the bars. If you're seen frowning too often, people start whispering. Is she barren? Is she unhappy? Is she disobedient? Is she ungrateful? Some fringe scholars believe that a few noble women learned to manipulate these restrictions, to wield soft power through subtle influence, smiling at the right man, complimenting the right bishop's sermon, winning favour with just enough grace to have a say in affairs behind the scenes. But these were exceptions, survival strategies, not triumphs. You can't win a game that was never designed for you to play. At night, your husband begins asking why you're so quiet, why you seem distant. You're expected to be both silent and warm, obedient and spirited, modest and seductive. A contradiction wrapped in lace. You smile and tell him you're simply adjusting. He nods, satisfied. He doesn't ask what you're adjusting from, and maybe he doesn't know. Maybe he really believes this is what love looks like, that a good wife listens, agrees, manages the home, and stays out of politics. That romance means ownership and loyalty means silence. He tells you you're lucky, and you believe he believes that. One afternoon, while you're sitting with the household ladies sewing at the long table in the solar, one of them, a widow named Agnes, tells a story about a friend who once contradicted her husband in front of guests. He refused to speak to her for a month, she says, smirking into her stitches. She was lucky, some men would have taken a switch to her. The other women laugh knowingly, like it's an old joke. You feel your stomach twist. Later that day, you accidentally break a goblet in the hall. Your husband isn't angry, he doesn't shout, he just raises an eyebrow and says, "Careless, aren't we?" Then he walks away. The silence that follows is louder than any scolding. You wonder if that's the point. That night you think of your mother. You remember how she used to smile through clenched teeth, how she always answered questions with questions, never quite saying what she thought. As a child, you assumed it was elegance. Now you know better. It was armour. The truth is, you didn't become a woman the moment you married. You became a ghost. A well-fed, finely dressed, dutiful ghost. The kind who smiles at visitors and eats neatly and never knocks over the salt. You lie in bed while your husband talks about hunting plans for the week, his voice lulling like distant thunder. He doesn't notice that you haven't said a word in half an hour. Or maybe he does, and he just doesn't care. You're not really expected to contribute. You're expected to exist. Tomorrow you'll rise again. You'll be bathed, dressed, seated, paraded. You'll manage a staff you don't command. You'll offer advice that isn't heard, and you'll pretend this is what you wanted. Because the vows weren't promises, they were instructions. Your new home is technically a manor, a stone-walled estate with arched windows, tapestries in every room, and enough servants to keep it all running like a polite, well-oiled lie. From the outside, it looks like the dream sold to girls who read courtly poems by firelight. Inside, though, it feels more like a very comfortable prison. Not a cell, exactly, more like a labyrinth. You can walk anywhere, but every path loops back to the same truth. This place is his, not yours. Your chamber is large, full of velvet cushions and carved wood furniture, but none of it feels like it belongs to you. You were moved in, not moved into. As in, you didn't choose a single item. Even your dressing table smells unfamiliar. The lavender oil imported from some town you'll never visit. The maids are polite. The steward's wife brings sweetmeats, and still you feel like a trespasser. At first, you try to settle into your role with grace. You walk the halls with purpose. You inspect the kitchen, compliment the cook, speak kindly to the laundress. You rehearse your place like an actor, studying a role she never auditioned for. When your husband is away on estate business, you're technically in charge. Lady of the Manors, That sounds powerful, right? Only it isn't. Because for all your titles and tasks, you don't really own anything. Not the lands, not the house, not even your own clothing, legally or under coverture. A word that sounds like a woolen blanket, but really means your husband speaks for both of you. If you wanted to make changes to the household budget, you'd need his approval. If you wanted to hire a new maid or dismiss a rude footman, you better hope he agrees. And if you disagree, well, that's adorable. There's a daily rhythm to the place. Servants up before dawn, cook fires lit, horses led out, linens aired. Prayers muttered in the chapel. You're expected to participate, of course. Not in labour, but in oversight. You stand at the edge of the activity, smiling, nodding, occasionally offering suggestions that are only acted on if they're convenient. You're a ceremonial fixture. Like the Virgin Mary painted on the chapel wall, beautiful, serene, and totally silent. It's not that your husband's cruel, he's just thorough. He likes order. He believes in roles. Yours, in his mind, is sacred. He praises your demeanour in front of guests. He says you're well-mannered, dutiful, quiet in the best way. You start to wonder if he's ever met you. The idea of a household being run by the lady was always more about keeping up appearances than real power. You're expected to manage food stores, assign tasks to servants, monitor cloth supplies, and host guests, but all of it exists under the umbrella of your husband's authority. Think of it as being the assistant manager of a shop you technically can't enter without permission. Take the linen room, for example. You notice the sheets are being stored too close to the hearth and mention that it might be a fire risk. The housekeeper nods politely. Then 2 days later the sheets are moved because he told her to do it. Not because you said something. He heard about it, repeated your words, and then it counted. You wonder if you should be grateful. At least he listens, right? At least he doesn't ignore you entirely. But the praise he gives feels like the kind of compliments you'd give a well-behaved hound. Good girl, you notice something useful. Have a treat. One afternoon you try to sneak outside alone, just to walk the outer edge of the orchard and clear your head. You're gone less than 20 minutes before a stable boy finds you and rushes back to tell your husband. That evening he gently reminds you not to leave the grounds without a companion. For your safety, he says. There are bandits in the woods. There are always bandits in the woods when a man wants to keep a woman close. And here's where things get interesting. Some noble women did try to subvert these rules. Quietly, cleverly. One woman kept a separate household ledger in secret and managed her estate's finances better than her husband ever could. Another used herbal medicine to treat villagers, earning loyalty that gave her real influence. But both of these women had one thing in common. They never let anyone know they were in charge. Because a powerful woman had to pretend not to be. In your case, the rules are subtle but suffocating. You're expected to supervise servants but never contradict them harshly. It's unladylike. You can suggest a new dish in the kitchen, but not criticize the cook. You may sing, but not too loudly. Read, but only devotional texts. Laugh, but modestly. Dance, but only when asked. Every day feels like you're balancing on a tightrope of performative grace. Too stern and you're scolded for arrogance. Too soft and you're useless. The sweet spot is somewhere between invisible and charming, and no one will tell you exactly where it is. One evening your husband brings in a guest, an older knight who once rode with his father. During dinner he tells a story about a woman he once saw ride into battle dressed as a man. Everyone laughs, but not kindly. A beast in a bodice, the knight says, wiping wine from his beard. Your husband joins in, saying, God help the man married to that. You look down at your plate, your fingers tight around your fork. Later that night, while the men drink in the great hall, you retreat to your chamber and pace in circles, barefoot on the cold floor. You touch the stone walls like they might give way. They don't. This house is full of beauty. The floors are polished wood. The fireplaces are carved with lions and roses. The library has a stained glass window that turns sunlight into rainbows. But none of it belongs to you. And no matter how wide the halls are, you can't find a place where your voice echoes back. There's a phrase used in some medieval texts to describe an obedient wife. She ran the house like a ghost in daylight. Present, yet unnoticeable. Efficient, yet silent. And that, more or less, is your new identity. You start to memorize the patterns in the tapestries just to stay sane. You count the steps between the kitchen and the solar. You watch the servants from the balcony and wonder if they feel more free than you. At least they're allowed to gossip. At least they don't have to pretend they're happy while being ignored. One morning you pass by the chapel and hear a low voice singing inside. You pause in the doorway. It's one of the kitchen girls, her voice soft and trembling, singing a hymn you haven't heard since childhood. She stops when she sees you. Sorry, my lady, she says quickly. You want to tell her to keep singing. You want to sit beside her and hum along, but you don't. You just nod and walk away, because you are the lady of the manor, and you have never felt less like yourself. You don't even make it through your first week as a wife before the expectations crash down like a dropped tray. It begins subtly, so subtly you almost don't notice at first. A look from your husband when you yawn during Vespers, a servant hesitating when you ask for a second portion of cheese, a gentle correction from the steward when you assign the wrong chambermaid to clean the solar, all wrapped in politeness, all as gentle as a dagger slipped between ribs. The real avalanche comes on the 8th day after breakfast, when your husband takes your hand lightly, like this is a loving moment, and says, "We should speak about your responsibilities." You freeze. Not because you weren't expecting it, but because the phrase is so loaded with implication you could tie it to your ankles and sink. You follow him to the private study, a small room lined with ledgers and scrolls, the hearth barely lit. He sits and gestures for you to do the same, though his posture remains taller, more dominant, like a schoolmaster with an especially thick book to assign. What follows is a list, a long one. Duties, expectations, suggestions for improvement. You're to keep a record of pantry stock and report shortages weekly. Oversee the mending of garments. Approve menu changes only after consulting with cook. Attend mass daily. Host visiting clergy without complaint. And make sure to keep the girls from gossiping. Your husband speaks with the tone of a man doing you a kindness, like this is all just helpful advice. But what it is, in reality, is a tightening of the leash. You may be called lady, but you are being trained like a new servant. Except unlike the maids, you're not paid and you can't leave. What they never tell you in fairy tales is that marriage in the Middle Ages came with relentless scrutiny. Not just from your husband, but from the entire household. Servants report your moods. The steward notes your efficiency. The chaplain watches for spiritual slackness. Even the cook gossips about your appetite. Are you too vain, too quiet, too bold? Are you still not pregnant? It's like being the lead actress in a play where the audience is allowed to slap you if they don't like your performance. By now, the party's over. The honeymoon is done. If you were ever granted the illusion of softness, it's been neatly packed away with the wedding flowers. Now comes the real work. And by work, we mean adjusting every breath to meet someone else's comfort. The worst part? You try to do well. You really, really try. You check the pantry, you review the linen stores, you smile when the priest drops by unannounced and pretends to admire the way your hair's braided. You hold your tongue when a chambermaid mutters under her breath. You even help a younger girl learn to sew a straight hemline and get quietly scolded for it later, because you should let the household teach itself discipline. Apparently, even kindness is a breach of protocol now. Your husband begins referring to you in the third person when talking to the steward. My lady wishes to review the wine stock, or she'll attend the next sermon with the bishop. You become a pronoun, a name spoken like a task to be managed. This isn't unusual, historically speaking. In noble households, wives were expected to be endlessly efficient, invisible unless praised, and always available. You're not just managing a house, you're embodying your husband's status. If the roast is overcooked, it reflects on him. If the servants are late to prayer, it's your failure. If the chamber smells musty, it's because you didn't notice. You are the physical manifestation of his competence. Your mistakes are his embarrassment. But what happens when perfection isn't enough? You find out on a Sunday evening. The kitchen fire goes out halfway through dinner prep and the meat is underdone. The servants are frantic. You try to fix it. Have a secondary hearth stoked. Ask for bread and wine to be brought out early. You keep guests entertained while the kitchen scrambles. It should be enough. But later, after the guests leave, your husband closes the door and says your management was chaotic, that the household looked unsettled, that it lacked grace. Grace. That word again. Always expected, never defined. That night you cry for the first time in days, quietly, on the floor beside your bed so no one will see. You bury your face in your veil and remind yourself that you chose none of this, that you've done nothing wrong, and yet you feel shame so deep it pools in your stomach like spoiled wine. The historical record is surprisingly quiet on what it felt like to become a wife in these years. There are endless poems about love, about gallant husbands and noble ladies with golden hair. But real letters, real journals, they're rare, and when they exist, they're cautious. A noble woman might hint at her loneliness in a letter to a cousin, or bury her fear in devotional prayers. Some scholars believe this lack of voice was by design, not just silence, but erasure. Meanwhile, you begin to lose the parts of yourself that once felt bright. You forget what your laugh sounded like before you had to measure its volume. You forget your favourite colour. You stop humming in the mornings. One day, while walking past the weaving room, you find a servant girl, crying behind the loom. You pause. She jumps to her feet, apologising over and over, terrified she'll be punished. You kneel beside her and ask what's wrong. Her brother was killed in a skirmish 2 towns away. You reach for her hand, and for the first time in weeks, someone holds yours like it matters. Then the steward appears behind you and clears his throat. The girl is dismissed. You're gently told that it's unseemly for the lady of the manor to sit on the floor with the help, that it's not dignified, that grief is best left to those who have time for it. You don't speak for the rest of the day. Each night, when you lie in bed beside your husband, who now refers to your silence as peaceful, you stare up at the ceiling and try to count how many days it's been since you made a choice that mattered. Then you realise you've lost track. Somewhere between the veil and the vows, between the feasts and the chores, your freedom wasn't just taken, It was trained out of you. They call it the bedding ceremony, as if draping the word in tradition and sacredness might disguise what it really is. You've heard the term whispered before in the manor's quieter corners, among the laundry girls, the chaplain's servant, the steward's wife after one too many goblets of spiced wine. You hadn't experienced it on your wedding night, but now, for reasons not fully explained to you, it's being arranged for this evening. Some say it was skipped before because your husband thought it unseemly. Others murmur that the household priest wasn't available. Whatever the excuse, the delay ends tonight. By midday, the whispers begin. You sense them like an itch under your skin. Servants glancing your way and looking quickly down. A maid folding linen in the solar pauses to ask if you would like rosewater added to your bath. You nod. She doesn't meet your eyes. That's how you know she already knows. When you ask your husband what's planned for the evening, he simply says, "A celebration of the marriage's completion," with a grin that makes your stomach twist into something cold and coiled. You smile tightly. You excuse yourself to the garden. You breathe so deep, your ribs ache. By supper, the tension in the air is sharp enough to slice through. The feast is heavier than usual. More meat, more wine, more laughter from men who won't have to answer for what happens later. You barely touch your food. Your maid, her hands shaking, laces you into your gown with extra care. You wonder if she's seen it before, if she had a mother or a sister who was paraded to her marriage bed like a sacrificial calf. This tradition, it's not universal, but it's not rare either. In some parts of Europe, particularly in noble circles, the bedding ceremony was seen as a necessary public marker of consummation, a legally and socially endorsed invasion. Guests would escort the couple to the marriage chamber, sometimes singing bawdy songs, throwing flower petals, or, worst of all, offering unsolicited advice. In the most horrifying versions, the couple was expected to lie together under the gaze of witnesses, sheets pulled high, and prove that the union was complete. It was rarely that grotesque, but close enough. Your ceremony is restrained, compared to others. There's no nudity, thank the saints. No priests at the bedside, no drunken guests pressing their noses against the doorframe. Just a procession, family and close companions, a handful of elders, the steward, the priest, the knight who drank too much last week and keeps winking in your direction. They escort you both to the bedchamber with songs and cheers. Your husband plays the part well, smiling, laughing, pretending to be bashful. You don't say a word, you feel like a doll held between strings. Inside the chamber, the crowd waits while you're undressed. Not entirely, just enough to show that yes, you're pure, or were. The veil is lifted, the outer layers removed. You're presented quietly like bread before the breaking. The bed is made with fresh linen, not because anyone expects rest. It's about proof. You know what's coming next. Not just the act itself, but the evidence, the bloody sheet, the announcement, the confirming nod from a matron or maid. The house needs to know that your husband got what he paid for. Here's the grotesque little secret. In medieval Europe, proving virginity on the wedding night was more important than proving love, compatibility, or even affection. The presence of blood on the sheet became a kind of certificate. Never mind that not all women bleed their first time. Never mind the pain. The point was not accuracy. The point was performance. For the household, for the family, for the bloodline. Some husbands faked the sheet. Some maids added chicken blood. Some brides were forced to submit to invasive checks before the wedding. These acts were framed as tradition, but they were surveillance, patriarchal security systems wrapped in lace and scripture. The door finally closes behind the last guest. The chamber is quiet, except for the sound of the fire and your husband undoing the last of his buttons. You sit on the edge of the bed, hands folded, trying to hold on to something, dignity, courage, anything at all. He touches your shoulder and you flinch. Not dramatically, but enough. He pauses, frowns, then says, "It has to be done, you know that." You nod, you do know. That's the worst part. The act itself is fast, again. Not unkind, not violent, but that's a low bar. You keep your face turned toward the wall, watching the shadows shift with the firelight. You don't cry, you don't speak. When it's over, he rolls away and begins to snore. You lie very still, then after what feels like a lifetime, you reach down, lift the sheet and see it. A small bloom of red. You breathe out, and it doesn't feel like relief. It feels like an admission that you've passed the test, that you've bled on cue, that you've given them what they needed. Before dawn, the evidence is collected, quietly. A servant retrieves the linen. You don't know if she'll display it or simply whisper confirmation to those who require it. Either way, the result is the same. You've completed the ritual, your body has been notarized, and yet you feel no more secure than before. If anything, you feel more visible, more claimed. You've entered a new phase now, not just as a wife, but as a verified vessel. From here forward, every meal you skip, every stomach cramp, every fainting spell will be scrutinized for signs of pregnancy. Your body is no longer just yours or his, it is theirs. The entire household's investment. Later that morning, you pass the steward in the corridor. He nods with a small, satisfied smile. "Congratulations," he says. "The household is pleased." Pleased. As if you hosted a successful feast or arranged the tapestries just right. You retreat to your chamber and close the door. You stare at the bed, the folded sheet, the imprint of a body that does not belong to you. You sit in the corner and press your forehead to your knees. In that moment, you are not a bride. You are a receipt. The morning you wake up bleeding, it isn't the kind you expected. It isn't your moon cycle, though in this house, even that would be noted, tracked, whispered about by old women with herbal pouches and suspicious expressions. No, this bleeding is different. Thicker. Hotter. It paints the sheets before your eyes are fully open, and when you sit up, it's already down your thighs. You panic, of course. For one horrifying moment you think you're dying, but no sharp pain follows, no fever or chill. It's just pouring, like a quiet protest from the inside out. Your maid enters moments later, sees the blood and freezes. She glances at your face, then at the sheets, then back to your face. "I'll fetch the healer," she says softly, and disappears. A healer, not a priest. That's something at least. By the time the woman arrives, grey-haired, stone-faced, hands like bark, the blood has slowed. You sit hunched on the edge of the bed, blanket over your lap, avoiding your reflection in the polished bronze mirror. The healer lifts the blanket, examines the sheets, asks a few clipped questions. "Have you felt faint? Has the bleeding lessened? Any pain in the belly?" You answer as best you can. She says it's likely a cleansing, the kind some women have after first bedding. "Especially with young wives," she mutters. "The body sometimes rebels." Then she gives you a bitter-smelling tonic and tells you to rest. You don't ask if it could have been a miscarriage. You don't dare. Because if it was, you're not sure who would be blamed, your husband, the stress, the bedding ceremony, or you. And more importantly, you're not sure who would care. Truth is, childbirth and pregnancy in the medieval world weren't just risky. They were life-threatening gambles disguised as sacred duties. 1 in 3 women died in childbirth or shortly after. For noble women, pregnancy was expected almost immediately after marriage. The entire structure of your identity now hinges on it. You're not just supposed to produce an heir. You're supposed to do it quickly, painlessly, and ideally without making anyone uncomfortable about it. You lie there all day, legs weak, body sore, thinking about how many women have bled in this exact bed, on this exact stone floor. Not from violence, necessarily, just from being born into this role. Your husband stops by in the afternoon. He doesn't sit beside you, just stands in the doorway and asks if you're recovering. You nod. He frowns a little. "The steward told me it was natural," he says. "Still, it might be best to limit your movements for a few days. You're a shaken glass of milk, and everyone around you just wants to put the lid back on." Over the next week, the bleeding fades, but it leaves a shadow behind. You start paying closer attention to your body. Every twinge, every cramp, every skipped meal. The household watches too, not obviously, but with subtle shifts in behaviour. The cook asks if you'd prefer lighter meals. The laundress begins placing extra cloths in your chamber. The chaplain slips a fertility charm into your prayer book. It's all smiles and support on the surface, but underneath it's surveillance. And what if you had lost a child? What would that mean for you? In some medieval circles, miscarriages were seen as a result of imbalance. Spiritual, physical, or even moral. Were you cursed? Had you angered the saints? Did you step on the wrong herb or let a witch braid your hair? Even today, historians debate how widespread the superstition really was. Some say noble families understood the realities of pregnancy loss. Others suggest that blame almost always found its way to the mother, especially if she was young, nervous, or unwomanly. You start to realise something that chills you. If you don't produce a child soon, your value will drop, not in some abstract emotional way, tangibly, the way meat spoils or coins lose weight. There are historical records of women being returned to their families because they failed to conceive, cast aside politely or not so politely, and replaced by someone proven. You begin to understand why some wives in the stories you heard as a child turned to prayers or potions or worse. They weren't vain or foolish, they were scared, they were trapped. One afternoon you sit in the solar and hear two of the maids whispering in the corridor. One says, "She looks pale," the other answers, "Maybe she's expecting," a hopeful tone, almost admiring, and then the kicker, "If not, he'll tire of her." You feel your throat close like a hand is squeezing it from the inside. Tire of you, like a worn cloak, like a chipped goblet. The pressure builds fast. And in private, your husband begins to change. Not drastically, but enough. Where once he'd let you skip a night in bed with a headache or a murmured excuse, now he insists. "The longer we wait, the more people talk," he says. "We must try harder." Try. As if your body is a field refusing to yield wheat. As if the plough isn't blunt or misused or entirely disinterested in your comfort. This is the point where you start to feel something heavier than sadness. It's resentment, not just toward him, but toward the whole machine. Toward the priest who blessed your womb before asking how you felt. Toward your father who handed you off like a side of beef. Toward the women who smiled at your wedding while secretly calculating your odds. You do what they all do, you hide it. You smile, you nod, you say your prayers. But late at night, when you're alone with your own breath and the creak of the wooden beams overhead, you imagine a world where your body is yours, where bleeding isn't treated like failure, where you can say no and not fear the fallout. You imagine being seen, not as a potential mother or a fine match, but as a person with an inner life that doesn't depend on womb status. Then the thought passes because it's dangerous to dwell. The next day you're summoned to attend a feast, a minor celebration, someone's cousin got knighted. You wear a dress with extra padding around the stomach, just in case someone's watching, which they are. Always. A few weeks pass, the blood has stopped, your appetite returns, the bruising you never admitted to fades from your inner thighs. You smile at the appropriate moments, laugh softly when required, and begin to feel like maybe, just maybe, you can perform this part well enough to avoid suspicion. Maybe you can drift through your days like the polished ghost of yourself, haunting the manor in a lovely dress. Maybe surviving isn't about fighting, maybe it's just about passing quietly like mist. But that delicate illusion shatters the moment you speak up. It starts innocently, too innocently really. You're seated with two ladies from a neighbouring manor who've come for a midday visit. You're sipping watered wine, discussing herbs, and the elder one mentions using rosemary to treat fever. You say almost casually, "Lavender oil works better, but it should be boiled with honey first or it will spoil the stomach." She goes silent, just for a moment. Then she gives a tight smile and replies, "That sounds more like something a wise woman would say." The word hovers in the air like smoke. You laugh, unsure whether this is mockery or just garden variety passive aggression. But the younger lady gives you a sharp look. "Did your mother teach you that?" she asks. "Or someone from the village?" You're not sure what to say because either answer is wrong. You're not supposed to know things, not real things, useful things. Knowledge belongs to monks and doctors and men who hold scrolls in dusty libraries. When a wife speaks of herbs or cures, she's either a good Christian tending the sick, or she's a whisper away from being called a witch. And in medieval Europe, witch is not a word you want floating around your name. The church had a complicated relationship with women's knowledge. Midwives, herbalists and healers were tolerated, until they weren't. If a treatment worked too well, or if the healer didn't know her place, or if a baby died and someone needed to blame someone, these women became targets. Not always burned at stakes, not in every region, but certainly watched, suspected, shunned, sometimes executed. And yes, noble women were not exempt. There are rare, chilling records of highborn wives accused of sorcery after a husband fell ill, or an heir was stillborn. The accusation didn't need proof. All it needed were gossip, timing, and the right kind of fear. You try to steer the conversation back to embroidery. Flowers, maybe. Everyone likes flowers. But the damage is done. That evening your husband says nothing, but you catch the way he looks at you while you stir your tea with a sprig of thyme. Not suspicious, just curious. A little too curious. Then come the quiet visits. First the chaplain, who just happens to pass by your solar and decides to linger. He asks you about your prayer habits. asks whether you've been fasting, whether you've confessed lately. Then he asks if you'd like to review some scripture together, especially the passages on women's virtue. You agree, of course you do. What else can you say? 2 days later, the steward's wife delivers a bundle of herbs from her own garden, she says, but the bundle contains items you didn't ask for and have no use for. Juniper berries, belladonna root, poppy seeds. She watches your reaction closely as you sort through them. You thank her with a tight smile and send the bundle to the laundry maid. The message is clear, they are watching now. You start editing yourself, you no longer mention herbs at all. You stop offering advice when someone sneezes or limps. You laugh more loudly at stories that aren't funny. You start pretending you've forgotten things you learned from your childhood nursemaid, just in case. Because in this world, a woman who knows too much is a danger. To herself, to her husband, to everyone. But fear has a strange twin. Anger. You feel it starting to wake up in you, like a low growl beneath your ribs. One morning, the laundress's child, barely 4, burns his hand near the hearth. The manor's physician is away, and the steward dithers. You kneel beside the boy and treat the burn with cool cloth, honey, and a poultice made from mashed yarrow and wine vinegar. The child stops crying within minutes. The skin begins to settle. The steward's wife sees the whole thing and says nothing. Not to you, not to anyone. But the next day, your chamber is visited again, this time by a different priest. He doesn't knock. Some of the household worry that you rely too heavily on folk knowledge, he says. There's a line, my lady, between practical wisdom and spiritual arrogance. You nod. You apologize. You do everything right. And still he leaves you with a warning. God made you obedient for a reason. The devil works through pride. Here's the kicker. Your own body isn't even considered neutral territory in this moral war. If you speak too much about remedies or healing, it's vanity. If you try to prevent pregnancy, it's sin. If you seek help during childbirth, you'd better be clutching a rosary in the other hand. Even your monthly bleeding is seen as impure, a sign that you must cleanse yourself before touching holy things. One scholar wrote that the medieval woman was both feared and needed, essential to lineage, feared for her body's mystery. You feel that paradox daily. You are their future and their threat, their hearthkeeper and their heretic. And if anything ever goes wrong, if a child falls ill, or a harvest fails, or your husband gets a fever you can't cure, it's your face they'll look to, not with empathy, but with suspicion, because you, with your soft hands and too quiet voice, might be hiding something dangerous, something unnatural, something unholy. So you learn to fade again. You double down on obedience. You let your husband speak for you, even when you have the better answer. You feign confusion during feast day prayers so the chaplain can correct you with that warm, patronizing smile. You smile back. You tuck your anger beneath your bodice like contraband, but you never stop watching. You learn the lines of every face in the manor. Who hesitates when asked a question, who limps when they think no one's looking, who keeps a pouch of dried mushrooms behind the pantry door. You become fluent in silence, and slowly, in that silence, something new begins to grow. Not rebellion, not yet, but a seed of knowing, a flicker of power, not to wield, not openly, just to have. The irony is not lost on you. Your nobility now, technically in charge of this household, yet half the people below you get more sleep and fewer instructions. You are the mistress of the manor, the lady in the hall, the wife of its lord. But really, you're somewhere between a ceremonial figurehead and a glorified servant yourself. Every day starts before you want it to, and ends long after your bones ache. You have your own maid, 2 in fact, but their main job seems to be preparing you to prepare everyone else. They lace you up, style your hair, bring your bath, and then, once you're properly assembled, you step out of your chamber like a wind-up doll who's been given just enough talk to host a breakfast. And from there, it doesn't stop. The ladies' duties, as they're called, are supposed to be a mark of pride. You are the moral compass of the household, the spiritual shepherd, the domestic overseer. You supervise the cooking, cleaning, weaving, brewing, laundering, tending to the sick, educating the younger servants, training the new girls, and somehow, you're also supposed to be gracious and radiant and composed, like the Virgin Mary had a never-ending to-do list and no free time for miracles. They tell you it's an honour. What it actually is, a grind. You spend the morning checking on the kitchen, where the cook informs you the salted cod smells off. You tell him to throw it out. He hesitates. Salted cod is expensive. and says perhaps your husband should decide. You smile and say, of course. You'll ask. Then you toss the fish anyway. You don't want to give anyone food poisoning again. Next, it's the laundress. There's a shortage of lye. The cloths aren't coming out clean. The soap making's been delayed because of rain. You nod, ask questions, pretend you know more about rain and lye than you do. Then it's off to the weaving room, where a new bolt of wool has arrived and the steward's niece is fighting with another girl about thread counts. You settle that dispute with more grace than you expected, but you also have to find a replacement thread spinner, and inspect the new table linens, and test the drying herbs, and then the chaplain wants a word, because the morning prayers didn't go as planned. By noon, you've already managed more crises than most men in your husband's court do in a week. And yet none of it counts. None of it is seen. When your husband hosts guests, you are praised for your poise, your modesty, your well-behaved staff. No one mentions the 5 separate decisions you made that kept dinner from becoming a full-blown fire hazard. You're visible only in outcome, never in action. Historically, noblewomen were indeed expected to manage domestic affairs, but always under the assumption that they did so quietly, gently, and gratefully. You were not supposed to show effort, to sweat, complain, raise your voice, or show exhaustion. If the bread was burnt, the servants were blamed. If the meal was perfect, your husband took the compliments. You floated at the top of a pyramid of labour and never got credit for balancing it. And the strange part is, you start getting good at it. Not because you enjoy it, but because it gives you something real to do. Something with measurable results. You may not own the estate, you may not be free to come and go, you may not speak first or last, but the rhythm of the household answers to you. If you disappear for a day, chaos ensues. If you forget to tell the laundress to reserve cloth for the bishop's visit, someone gets humiliated. You are the quiet engine behind a very loud machine. There's a kind of dignity in that, until someone reminds you you're not quite worthy of it. One afternoon, you pass through the chapel to find the chaplain scolding a servant girl. Her dress is wrinkled. Her hands are dirty. She reflects on the lady of the house, he says, when he notices you watching. It is your duty to raise these girls properly. You nod, of course. You always nod. Then he adds, a well-managed house is a mirror of a well-managed woman. The implication lands hard. If something goes wrong under your roof, it's not just your failure. It's your moral flaw. Maybe you've become lax. Maybe you're slipping. Maybe you're not praying hard enough. You wonder if he scolds your husband when the steward drops a coin purse. Somehow you doubt it. That night, after dinner, your husband thanks you for organising the bishop's visit so smoothly. The meat was done properly this time, he says. Good. You blink. That was the cook, who almost quit yesterday, because the steward tried to short him a shipment of barley. You nearly remind him. But then you remember how many times your reminders have been met with vague, disinterested nods. You say thank you instead. You sip your wine. You press your thumb against a splinter on the underside of the table just hard enough to keep your mind still. And what happens if you make a real mistake? Not a wrinkled curtain or a missing bottle of oil, but something larger. You already know. A mistake from a wife reflects poorly on her husband. Too many mistakes and rumours begin. She's not capable. She's not godly. She's not suited to her station. Whispers about being sent home start to bubble up. Or worse, about being replaced. You're not irreplaceable. That much is clear. There's one small corner of your day that no one touches. Right after dusk, just before the final candles are snuffed, you walk the long corridor to the weaving room and sit beside the fire. You pretend to inspect cloth, but really, you just sit. Sometimes the steward's niece joins you, mending stockings. Sometimes no one does. Either way, for 20 minutes, no one asks you for anything. You treasure that silence. And still, you're never off duty. Not even in your dreams. You dream of lists, of missing barrels, of firewood not being stacked properly, of angry chaplains, torn linens, bloody sheets. You wake in cold sweat, heart pounding, hands clutching invisible ledgers. And the worst part? No one will ever call this what it is. Work. They'll call it womanly duty, natural grace, noble temperament, divine role. But you know the truth. You're not a manager. You're not a queen. You're the servant who sleeps in the master's bed. You wake to birdsong and think for a moment that today might feel different. There's a softness in the air that only comes with early spring, dew glistening on the glass panes, the faint scent of damp earth rising up from the garden beds. You pull on your robe and step to the window, hoping for something. peace, maybe. A sign. Anything that tells you this life might someday feel like yours. Behind you, the sheets are already being straightened by your maid. The pillows fluffed, the nightgown folded. You're not allowed the indulgence of mess, even in solitude. Every wrinkle is a message, every gesture a performance. So you dress, as usual, in another gown you didn't choose, eat a breakfast you didn't request, and smile at a husband you didn't pick. But today, he has something to tell you. The Baron is coming, he says over cold bread and boiled eggs. He'll be here before sundown. You nod. This Baron isn't just a family friend, he's a political tether. The man whose favour secures your husband's trading rights in the southern fiefs. He's older, sharp-eyed, and according to your husband, fond of formality, which means he expects everything to be perfect. The feast, the guest chamber, you. So begins your day as hostess. Again. Hosting is supposed to be one of the highest duties of a noblewoman, proof of your refinement, your warmth, your usefulness. You supervise the cleaning of the guest chambers, the kitchen menu, the flower arrangements, the polishing of silver. You instruct the steward to move the Lord's favourite chair to the fire, to be sure the wine is mulled just so, to remind the kitchen that the Baron dislikes garlic. You pace and organise and correct and smile. No one thanks you. You're thanked through your husband. By late afternoon, the manor is gleaming. The floors have been scrubbed, the tapestries shaken, the hearth stoked to roaring. The Baron arrives just as the sun dips below the trees, bringing with him a cloud of retinue and an exhausted hunting dog. He kisses your hand and says, "You look well, lady." You don't, actually. You haven't slept more than 4 hours in days, but it doesn't matter. Beauty is just another part of the script. Supper is a spectacle. You sit beside your husband across from the Baron, and between bites of roast quail and stewed lentils, you nod and smile at their conversation. They discuss war, weather, wool, and women. Not you, but the idea of you. Daughters, mistresses, widows. The Baron says his niece has been difficult about her engagement. Too many ideas in her head, he grumbles. Your husband laughs. They get like that if left alone too long. You laugh too. You have to. When the wine flows, the Baron leans forward and says, "You've done well here, my dear. The manor feels tight, ordered. Must be your husband's influence." You nod again. Historically, there's an odd duality in how noblewomen were treated as estate managers. On one hand, they were trusted to maintain enormous domestic operations, hundreds of staff, intricate inventories, seasonal production. On the other hand, the credit for that work almost always flowed to their husbands. If a manor flourished, it was due to his good governance. If it faltered, she was neglecting her duties. But every noble household had an unofficial truth. The woman kept it running. Because when your husband was gone, which he often was, you stepped into a role that blurred the line between domestic and political. You managed debts, hired staff, negotiated with suppliers. If necessary, you negotiated with soldiers. All behind the scenes, of course. Which brings you to today. Because when your husband retires after dinner with the Baron to discuss matters of state, you are not dismissed. You are summoned. Not to speak, of course, but to listen, and to smile while doing it. The conversation is dull at first. Shipments, borders, a bridge that collapsed near the southern border. Then it drifts into something that makes your spine stiffen. The king's tax assessor may come through in spring, the Baron says. He'll expect records, clean ones. Your husband nods, then glances at you. My wife keeps them in perfect order. The Baron chuckles. As long as the ink matches the stories. And just like that, Andant, you realise something terrifying. The records you've been keeping, the ledgers, the inventories, the monthly accounts, aren't just helpful household tools. They are part of a greater web of political and economic survival. If there's a discrepancy, you will be blamed. If the numbers don't add up, you might be the excuse, but you'll never be the defence. That night you review the records again, alone, by candlelight. You double-check the grain counts, the fabric orders, the flour rations. You don't sleep. You correct one number, though you're not sure if it was ever wrong to begin with. It just felt off. This is your life now. A constant feverish maintenance of a system you didn't build, don't control, and can't escape. But if it collapses, it will be your name on everyone's lips, not with anger, not even with accusation, just disappointment and dismissal. Around dawn, a knock comes at the chamber door. It's your husband, still dressed. He says nothing about the records. He simply sits beside you and lays a hand on your shoulder. "You've been up all night," he says. You nod. "I appreciate your work," he says. "You're indispensable." Indispensable. A lovely word. You wonder how long it lasts. And then he says something you don't expect. "If I fall in battle or in court, you'll need to run this place properly. Promise me you won't let the steward take over." You blink. He's not joking, and you promise. But here's the thing, that's not power. That's risk disguised as trust. If he dies and the manor falters, it's not the steward they'll blame, it's not the priest. It's you. There's a historical pattern to this. Widowhood sometimes granted women more freedom, but only if they succeeded in stepping into their husband's shoes. Fail, and you became a liability. Succeed, and you were quietly respected, but still watched, always watched. You lie down that night knowing something strange. You're essential here. This place needs you. But needing someone and respecting them are two very different things. You're no longer just a wife, and you're the scaffolding. But scaffolding can be pulled down as soon as the paint dries. The troubadours arrive 2 days after the Baron leaves, trailing dust and song behind their mismatched cloaks. They're not here for you, of course. They're here because your husband is in a generous mood. And because the harvest was slightly better than expected, and because the manor hasn't heard laughter in weeks. You're told to prepare refreshments and to make sure the solar is suitably cheerful. You're also warned not to be too generous, lest the household appear indulgent. In other words, put on a show, but keep it subtle. You've heard the songs before, they always go the same way. A noble knight falls hopelessly in love with a fair maiden. She's beautiful, chaste, poetic, and possibly half divine. He writes verses for her, defeats monsters in her name, and dies tragically before ever getting past first base. That's the point, of course. Courtly love isn't about real affection, it's about adoration from afar. The illusion of passion, with none of the risk. You sit through the first hour politely, smiling as your guests drink and sigh and murmur approval over lines about roses that wither for want of a kiss. The troubadour is young and earnest, his lute slightly out of tune, his accent charming enough to earn him an extra piece of honeyed bread. The ladies swoon. One of the maids presses a flower into his hand. It's all very sweet, very staged, very safe. Then he sings a song about a forbidden love. A lady who writes secret letters to a man who isn't her husband. You watch the room shift as he plays. Eyes flick to you, to your husband, to the steward's wife who used to smile more than she does now. Your husband laughs at the song, loudly. "Nonsense," he says, raising his goblet. "If any of you found a letter like that in your wife's drawer, what would you do?" A few men chuckle. One mutters something about burning it. Another says, "I'd burn her." Laughter again. You don't laugh. Historically, courtly love was always meant to be harmless. Decorative. Men wrote poems for married women, and those women blushed appropriately while never acknowledging anything real. It was a social game, one that reinforced gender roles more than it ever threatened them. You could admire your lady, write her name in a sonnet, call her your muse, but only as long as she stayed unavailable, untouched, uninterested. The reverse, of course, was unacceptable. If a woman wrote love poems to a man outside her marriage, it wasn't romantic, it was treason. Adultery could get you killed, and not in the poetic, star-crossed way the troubadours sing about, more like stoned to death in the village square. You think about that as you pour wine for the visiting lords, as you smile at jokes that circle like vultures around fidelity. You wonder how many women have stood exactly where you are, listening to songs about love while knowing they will never feel anything close to it again. That night, you find yourself in the library, long after everyone has gone to bed. The fire's low, just embers. You run your fingers along the spines of the scrolls and books, most of them religious, some historical, one collection of riddles so old the parchment flakes when you touch it. There are no poems written by women here. No letters, no diaries. If any lady of the manor before you ever loved someone in secret, or even just in private, she left no trace. It's not that women didn't have inner lives, it's that their inner lives were deliberately erased. Only the loudest, most politically useful voices were preserved. If a woman loved quietly, fiercely, or desperately, she had to keep it hidden between her ribs like a splinter she couldn't pull out. If she dared to act on it, well, history does not forgive bold women kindly. And yet they did it anyway. There are whispers, fringe stories, of noble women who kept secret lovers, who disguised themselves to attend festivals, who wrote anonymous poems and passed them among the ladies in waiting like contraband. Most were caught, some were executed, a few vanished, slipping into convents with nothing but a ring and a story they never told. You try to imagine writing a love letter, not even a scandalous one, just a quiet confession of loneliness, of longing, of that stubborn part of you that still wants to feel seen. You wonder who you would write it to. Not a knight, not a poet, maybe no one, maybe just yourself. You go to your chamber and pull out a scrap of parchment, just to see if the ink still flows. You don't write much, just a sentence. Sometimes I forget who I was before the veil. You stare at it until the ink dries, then burn it in the candle flame. The next day the troubadours are gone, their songs echoing faintly through the corridors. Your husband is in good spirits. He says you played your part well, that the manor felt alive again. You nod. Of course, what else would you do? But that night as you bathe, you find yourself humming one of the songs, the one about the lady and her secret letters, and you wonder, not for the first time, what would happen if you ever crossed that line, if you ever stopped pretending that silence was enough. It's not that you want to betray him, it's that you want something that is yours. Even if it's just a thought, an ache, a line of poetry pressed into the pages of your memory, where no steward or chaplain or visiting baron will ever find it. Because you can play the perfect wife all day, you can host and manage and nod and never speak out of turn, but the heart has a habit of living in the wrong century, and sometimes it writes letters you'll never send. The war comes quietly at first, not with horns or banners or men shouting in the fields, but with messengers on tired horses and letters that arrive sealed with too much wax. Your husband reads the first one by the hearth, brow furrowed, lips pressed tight. He doesn't tell you everything, of course. He tells you what he thinks you should know, that there's unrest in the west, that old rivalries are stirring, that. It's nothing serious yet. But 2 days later, the armoury is opened. The servants start oiling blades. Horses are reshod, and the grooms walk with a kind of heavy silence that tells you more than words ever could. Another letter arrives. This time your husband leaves before dawn. Just like that, you're alone. Well, not alone. You're surrounded by dozens of servants, stewards, maids, and reeves. But he is gone, and that changes everything. Because now you're not just the lady of the house, you're the one holding the reins, whether anyone admits it or not. He leaves you instructions, of course. A long scroll, sealed and stamped, detailing what should be done in his absence, how the accounts should be handled, which crops to prioritise, who to trust, who to avoid. It's not a will, not quite, but it feels like one. And with him gone, something shifts. Not in the house, in you. You rise earlier, speak with more authority. People look to you, not just for approval, but for answers. At first, the steward defers politely. Then, when he realises your husband isn't returning anytime soon, he defers with real attention. You see it in the way the servants glance your way. During meetings, you speak and they nod. You order the outer wall reinforced. You tell the kitchen to stretch the grain. You instruct the priest to prepare prayers for protection, and secretly ask the stable boy to keep watch at night. This is not the version of power they promised you in all those bridal tales. This is something messier, sharper, real. Historically, when war drew the men away, noble women became de facto rulers of their estates. Letters from the 14th and 15th centuries document women organising defences, collecting taxes, distributing rations, even negotiating truces. But these women weren't celebrated. They were tolerated, temporarily. As long as the husband lived, the wife's authority was on loan. The minute he returned, it disappeared like dust brushed from a table. Still, during those brief windows, some women found a kind of clarity. They realised what they were capable of, and you're starting to feel it now. For once, you're not just reacting, you're acting. The first test comes a week into your husband's absence. A small group of men arrives at the manor gate, peasants from a nearby village. Their crops failed, and they beg for grain. The steward argues against it. We need to save what we can, he warns. We don't know how long the Lord will be gone. But you remember their village. You rode through it once, a lifetime ago before you were married. You remember the girl who gave you a blue ribbon just for smiling at her. You tell the steward to release 2 sacks, just 2, enough to keep them alive. He sighs but obeys. The next day a note appears at the gate. Thank you, my lady. We won't forget. Later you learn they've begun calling you the kind mistress. The steward laughs. Softness won't hold a manor, he says, but something about the name sticks, not as weakness, but as strategy. Fear makes people obey, but gratitude builds loyalty, and loyalty matters now, because rumours begin to circle. Bandits in the woods, a burned field 2 miles east, a merchant who never made it back from the port. The priest says it's a time of trial. The cook says it's just bad luck. You say nothing, but inside a knot tightens. What no one tells you is how much war changes for those left behind. For the wives, daughters, sisters and mothers sitting in stone houses, staring down a future that grows darker, with every smoke plume on the horizon. You take to walking the walls at dusk. You never thought you'd do that. It's something your husband did, a routine, a show of presence. But now it's yours. You circle the outer parapets, shawl tight around your shoulders, watching the tree line for movement. The guards nod as you pass. You nod back. One night, you find a young guard sleeping on his watch. He startles awake, fumbling for his blade. You don't scold him. You simply take his dagger, hand it to his captain, and replace him with another. You don't yell, you don't explain, you act. From that night forward, no one sleeps on the wall. You're not unafraid. But fear, you've learned, doesn't get the last word. Action does. There's a strange dignity in this in-between space. You're not quite a ruler. You're not quite safe. But for the first time since your wedding, you feel like you're shaping something. Like you're not just a bride or a hostess or a shadow at the side of a man who sees you as decoration. And yet, even now, no one would call you powerful. Because your authority is still borrowed. It hangs on the hope that your husband will return, that you'll hand the reins back without a fight, that you'll smile and step aside and pretend this didn't awaken something deep and dangerous in your chest. One evening you open his study and sit in his chair. You rest your hands on the arms like you used to. You look out the window at your estate, your people, your sky, and you ask a question you've never dared before. What if he doesn't come back? Not with hope, not with fear, just possibility. And for the first time the thought doesn't terrify you. It thrills you. You find out about the mistress in the most humiliating way possible, over spiced pears and gossip. It's during a visit from Lady Clarice, a neighbouring noblewoman whose voice carries like a church bell, and whose mouth is never far from someone else's secrets. You don't like her, but your husband always insisted she was well-connected, and in times of war, well-connected women get extra cake and the best chair near the fire. She's sipping wine, eyeing your dress with barely disguised envy, and telling a story about her cousin's steward who ran off with a miller's daughter. Everyone around the table is laughing politely, but then she shifts tone and says, "Of course your husband must be terribly bored with no distraction. I do hope he's found some company in the field." And there it is, the dagger slipped into conversation so smoothly it barely nicks the air. You don't blink, you smile, you say, "He's always had a fondness for his men," and then excuse yourself before your hands start shaking. The moment you're alone, you sit down hard on the edge of your bed. It's the tone that gave it away, not what she said, but how she said it. Casual, certain, like it's already common knowledge, like she's not sharing a rumour, but reminding you of a fact you've simply failed to acknowledge. So now you know. He has someone else, or several someones, it doesn't matter. What matters is that you're sitting here in your finely appointed prison, managing his estate, shielding his name, stretching his grain, smiling through his absences, and somewhere out there, he's wrapped in another woman's arms, grunting poetry to someone who doesn't have to worry about grain taxes and prayer schedules. It's not a surprise. You'd be naive to expect loyalty from a man of his rank. Even medieval marriage contracts often made space for this kind of quiet betrayal. Concubines were accepted, unofficial wives were ignored, and mistresses were rarely punished unless they got too loud or too pregnant. But still, knowing is different than suspecting. You stand, walk to the window, and try to let the cold air clear your head. There were stories in your childhood, quiet ones, told behind tented fingers by the servants, lords who took comfort women in, on campaigns, ladies who received gifts from their husbands' lovers as a sort of unspoken apology, noblemen who housed mistresses in the very same castle, just in a different wing. Discretion was the only requirement. As long as it wasn't spoken, it didn't have to be answered for. And you were taught to be gracious, to understand, to accept that marriage is about alliance, not affection. You were warned, carefully, gently, that men have their needs and that it's unseemly for a wife to pry. But tonight, Sitting alone in the cold light of dusk, you don't feel gracious. You feel used. You think about how many nights you've lain awake, listening to the wind and the crackle of the hearth, while he was out playing soldier and lover in equal measure, how many weeks you've spent organising his records, smoothing his absence with your good manners, nodding through prayers you no longer believe will protect you. And now you're supposed to smile, to let it pass. No, you don't smash anything, you don't scream, you don't even cry, you're not allowed that kind of public grief. But inside, a part of you starts to turn cold, not broken, just crystallised. You begin to think differently. You start by visiting the chambermaid who knows everyone's secrets. Her name is Talia. Small, clever, always 2 steps behind the conversation and 1 step ahead of everyone else. You don't ask outright. You just let her speak, ask questions about the road, the men, the camps. Eventually she confirms it. He took a girl from the village near the western ridge. Young, pretty, red hair. There are others, she thinks. One at the southern camp, possibly a widow, possibly not. You thank her. You give her a small pouch of coin. You say nothing else. And now you know everything you need to. You try to tell yourself it doesn't matter, that it's expected, that it's normal. But the problem is you're not normal. You've spent too many nights reading ledgers, memorising maps, watching the manor like a hawk. You know the rhythms of this place better than anyone. You've grown sharper, more capable, and more dangerous than the girl he married. And now you've been insulted. Not just privately, publicly. Lady Clarisse knows, which means others do too. And that means your control is cracking. Because in this world, a wife's strength is like plaster, solid as long as it looks smooth. The moment people see the cracks, they start pulling at them. They test you, mock you, question your authority. You must act, so you do, subtly. First, you make sure Clarisse is never invited back. The message is delivered by the steward, polite but final. Then you take inventory of the kitchen, the guest chamber, the wine cellar. You have the guard rotated, the chapel cleaned, the curtains washed. You assert yourself in every corner of the house, not with rage, but with presence. You remind them all, you are still here, you are still the wife. You write your husband a letter, short and sharp. You don't mention what you know, but your tone is unmistakable. You ask when he plans to return. You remind him that taxes are due, that grain is low, that there have been whispers of wolves in the forest. You use his own words, urgency, stability, legacy. He writes back 2 weeks later, brief, apologetic. He says he'll return soon. You read the letter once, then burn it. It's not about bringing him home, it's about showing that you can, that you will. Because here's the truth that no one tells a bride before her wedding night. You're not in competition with the mistress. You're in competition with the silence that lets her exist without consequence, and you refuse to lose. The first time your husband refers to your body as his right, you're not entirely sure you heard him correctly. The word comes casually, in a conversation that isn't about love or intimacy or even desire. He's talking about the steward's new wife, how young she is, how soft-spoken. Lucky man, he says, gets a sweet one. But then again, wives are what we're owed, aren't they? Part of the order of things. He says it with a shrug. A joke, maybe, but you feel something cold behind your ribs. You don't laugh. That night when he comes to your bed, it's not rough, not forceful, but it's also not asked. He touches you like a door he's used 1,000 times, opens you without knocking. This too is tradition. He leaves after, as always. You lie awake, as always. But this time you don't just feel sad, you feel violated. The word doesn't exist yet in the way you understand it now. There is no marital rape in this century, not legally, not morally. In the eyes of the church, once you're married, your body becomes a shared property. But shared is generous. In practice, it belongs to him. You can't say no. If you do, you're denying your duty. Some priests even say it's a sin to refuse your husband pleasure, that it makes you prideful, selfish, a threat to his virtue. And if you flinch or pull away, the blame will land on you. You must not love him enough. You must be barren, frigid, cursed. A wife who denies her husband is a woman begging for trouble, and possibly the devil. You start noticing how many things in your life are described in terms of ownership. Your chamber is his. Your clothes are gifts from him. Your work is on behalf of him. You used to think that was just poetic language, but now you understand it's the entire structure. This marriage was not a joining, it was an absorption. You're not one half of a whole, you're a vessel he believes he filled, and God help you if you try to seal the top. The days become a slow erosion. You learn to brace for him, shoulders slightly tensed when he walks in, your breathing steadying when he brushes your arm. You've trained your face into the perfect mask, soft, responsive, just eager enough to avoid suspicion. But inside you're calculating, because you're starting to wonder just how much this law, this divine right to your body, can be bent. Not broken, not yet, but bent. There are fringe stories, quiet ones. You've heard of a noblewoman who faked illness for a year, claimed a bleeding disease so she could sleep alone. Another who drugged her husband with poppy wine every night until he forgot to want her. Another still who sent her lover to war and claimed his child as her husband's. Risky, but successful. You don't want a lover. You don't want anything other than the return of your own skin. One afternoon you retreat to the herb garden. Alone, you kneel beside the yarrow and press your fingers into the soil until your nails darken. The healer woman joins you silently, kneeling on the opposite side. Her hands are covered in nettle oil. You don't speak plainly. No one does. But you say, "Sometimes I wish for rest that cannot be interrupted." She doesn't look at you, just snips a stem of wild of wild mint, and says, "There are teas that help with that. Steep it long enough and the mind wanders far." You don't ask for more. But the next day there's a pouch tucked under your pillow. No label, just a smell. Earthy, bitter, heavy with sleep. That night when your husband comes to your bed, you offer him a cup of warmed wine, his favourite. You've sweetened it slightly. He drinks, he yawns, he reaches for you, then stops, blinking slowly, like the room is suddenly too wide. You smile. He murmurs something about too much sun and falls asleep without another word. You lie awake again, but this time not with grief. With a plan, you begin to dose him gently, not every night, not enough to be noticed, just enough to buy yourself silence, space and peace. It's not freedom, but it's a foothold. And with that foothold you begin reclaiming things. Small at first, you refuse to wear the red dress he likes. You start locking your chamber door during the day. You take long walks in the orchard, alone, without explanation. You write letters you never send. You sing to yourself when no one is listening. He doesn't seem to notice. Or maybe he thinks it's charming. Maybe he thinks your moods are just another part of womanhood, too delicate to understand, not worth correcting. Either way, you begin to feel something dangerous and intoxicating. Autonomy. You start to think about other women. The steward's wife, who no longer speaks unless spoken to. The kitchen girl with the bruise behind her ear. The maid who was sent away suddenly after a night spent crying in the solar. You've seen the signs before, but now you recognise them for what they are. He owns you, yes, but he's not the only one who thinks he owns someone. And once you see it, really see it, you can't stop seeing it. One morning you pass by the priest's chamber and hear him reading aloud. "Wives, submit to your husbands, for the husband is the head of the wife as Christ is the head of the church." You pause outside his door, and for the first time in your life you feel something close to hatred for a holy man. The church has always spoken about women as vessels, of virtue, of sin, of children, of men's desire. You were taught to see your body as a tool for salvation. But now you understand that they never cared about your salvation. They cared about your obedience. And you're done. You can't change the law, you can't change the church, you can't even change your husband. But you can change the shape of your silence. You can turn it into something sharp. You start collecting stories, listening, watching, mapping the secret language of the women around you. The nods, the hesitations, the names not spoken, the bruises hidden. You aren't ready to act, not yet, but you're building something. And it's bigger than just your bed. You're starting to understand that not every woman survives this life by enduring it quietly. Some do, yes, smiling and nodding, folding themselves neatly into the lines of obedience like pressed linen. But others shape their survival into something more clever. Something that whispers behind closed doors, stews in locked cupboards, and drips slowly into goblets of mead. Poison, they say, is a woman's weapon. You've heard it murmured before, usually in cautionary tales. A king's third wife with unnaturally pale hands whose husband died in his sleep. A baron's widow who brewed tea with herbs too bitter to be innocent. There are no trials, only rumours. No convictions, only a sudden funeral and the ghost of a satisfied smile. It's a dangerous subject. You've never said the word aloud, but lately the idea visits you at night like a guest who sits beside your bed, silent and patient, just waiting for you to start the conversation. Not that you want him dead. No, that would be too easy, too final. You want something more delicate, a shift in the balance, a way to tilt the scales without breaking them. You want power, yes, but more than that, you want the option of power. The knowledge that if you needed to, you could. It begins when the healer returns with a satchel of herbs for the kitchen, mostly safe things. Thyme, parsley, rosemary, but tucked into the bottom is something else. A bundle wrapped in oilcloth, its contents sticky and dark with a scent that clings to your fingers long after you touch it. You don't ask what it is, she doesn't say. That's how these things work. You take it anyway. You keep it hidden, not in your chamber, but in the root cellar behind a loose stone near the vinegar barrels. No one goes there but the cook, and she's too superstitious to lift the stones. She once told you she believes spirits hide under the floor. Let her keep believing it. It's convenient. What you've hidden isn't lethal, not immediately. It causes weakness, sweating, dizziness, a muddling of the thoughts that makes the strongest man forget which foot he's walking on. A few flakes in wine, and the lord of the manor becomes a muttering fool for half a day. You know this because you try it. Once. Your husband has returned by now, war-worn and full of stories he thinks you want to hear. He says the campaign was dull, the men were rowdy, the food was worse than pig slop. He doesn't mention the red-haired mistress. Doesn't need to. Her absence trails behind him like perfume. He's been back 3 days when you lace his wine. Just a pinch. Enough to soften him. He doesn't notice. He simply grows foggy. Talks too long at dinner. Forgets the name of his reeve. Says he wants to go hunting and then forgets to leave the hall. You play the doting wife. You say he must be overtired. You tell the servants to light fewer candles, speak more quietly. You stroke his temple and say things like, "Rest, my love," while your mind hums with the precision of a saw. This is control, not in the way men wield it, blunt and loud and flashing steel, but in the way of embers, quiet, constant, capable of burning down a forest if left unattended. Still, you are careful, you do not repeat the dose right away, you watch him closely. You memorize his moods, his tells. You learn what parts of him are still vulnerable, his pride, his need for praise, his assumption that you, like the furniture, will remain exactly where he left you. And you start to listen differently. The steward mutters about taxes, the cook complains of mould in the grain. A kitchen girl confesses, while scrubbing the floor, that her sister is pregnant with no husband to name. You keep a mental ledger, not just of goods, but of grievances. Who's angry, who's desperately who might be useful. You begin to see patterns. Power flows through the household like water. Not always downhill. Sometimes it circles, pools in strange places. In the hands of a scullery maid who knows which door squeaks. In the priest who drinks too much wine and forgets what he said yesterday. In the pages you never used to read, tucked into the back of prayer books. Old recipes for things you're not supposed to touch. You read them anyway. Because if poison is a woman's weapon, knowledge is her armour. Historically, there are records of noble women who used both. Discreetly, of course. An herb slipped into a drink. A tincture added to ink. Even just the threat of it. A dried root left out where a husband might see, its meaning known but unspoken, was enough to remind a man that his wife wasn't as docile as her veil suggested. One such story comes from the north. A lady who kept bees, whose husband grew mysteriously ill every time he angered her. He never died, but he became quieter, more devout, more cautious, and she lived to a comfortable old age, surrounded by grandchildren who wrote poems about her wisdom. You don't want to become a myth, but you do want to live, not just survive, live. Breathe without flinching, sleep without waiting for footsteps in the dark, eat without pretending to be hungry. And if the only way to do that is to make him fear your silence, then so be it. Fear is a kind of love in the hands of a woman who's learned to wield it. But fear alone isn't enough. You still have to smile, to curtsy, to weep with the other wives when the bishop comes preaching about obedience. You still have to act as though your husband is noble and kind and just, even when he reaches for you at night and you imagine placing your hand across his mouth until he stops breathing. You don't do it. You won't. Not yet. But it lives in you now, this thought, this option. And maybe that's all you need. Because when you have no choice, you're a servant. When you have one choice, even if you never use it, you are free. And freedom for a medieval bride begins in secret. He returns from a week-long trip smelling of travel dust, ale, and something else. Something faint and sweet that clings to his cloak and makes your stomach clench. You don't ask. You don't need to. The scent is foreign to this house. Something floral, like the perfumed oils sold in the merchant stalls of market towns. Something no maid in your household wears. It follows him into the room like a second shadow. He doesn't notice your silence. Or maybe he does, but he's used to it. He talks over it the way men speak through rain, irritated but undeterred. The roads are worse than ever, he says. I'll have to lodge a complaint with the magistrate. My horse nearly threw me twice. You murmur something appropriate, something that sounds like concern. You even offer to help remove his boots. He waves you off. Not like that girl at the southern villa, he mutters. She had the hands of an angel. You pause, just a beat, and continue pouring wine. There it is. Not even a secret anymore. The bitterness rises in you like bile, but you swallow it. You've been here before. Anger is useless unless you can shape it into something useful. And tonight, he's ill. It starts at dinner. He pushes his plate away early, says the stew is too salty. His hands shake as he lifts his goblet. His face goes pale. You make all the right noises, shock, concern, the swift command to fetch the healer. The servants scatter. By the time she arrives, he's slumped in the chair, sweating and mumbling. Just fatigue, the healer says, glancing at you with that sharp look she's used before. The road can be hard on a man. She prescribes rest, broth, and less wine. He glares at you like it's your fault. You offer a soft smile. It'll pass. You already know that. You measured the dosage carefully. You only meant to rattle him, not damage him, not yet. But his illness lingers longer than it should. For 3 days he lies abed, irritable and weak. And in his place something else creeps in. Accusation, not outright, but implied. He begins asking more questions about the food and about the servants, about who prepares his wine, about what books you've been reading. You play your part, you feign indignation. Why would I harm you, you ask softly, while brushing his hair from his clammy forehead. You're all I have. He believes you, or pretends to, because in this world a wife harming her husband is not just unthinkable, it's treason. The law is clear, a woman who poisons her husband faces burning. Not hanging, not exile, fire. You think about that sometimes. What it would feel like standing on a pyre, eyes stinging with smoke, knowing that the same men who smirked at your wedding feast are watching you burn for daring to hold power they believe is theirs. The same hands that handed you off in marriage, now throwing kindling. There's something twisted about the way people respond to a woman's strength. If you weep, you're weak. If you endure, you're holy. If you resist, you're a witch. And lately they're watching you closer. Even the servants. You sense it. Their glances linger longer. Their nods are less enthusiastic. Gossip ripples through the halls like smoke. She walks too much at night, someone whispers. She spends too much time with the healer. You've done nothing out of line, nothing they could prove, but in a house built on suspicion, innocence isn't armour. It's kindling. So you begin to withdraw. You shorten your walks, you limit your time in the solar, you ask fewer questions, laugh more easily, let your husband dominate every conversation like a rooster in his own rotting coop. But it doesn't help. The suspicion clings, especially once he recovers. He doesn't confront you, he's not brave enough for that. But he lingers, watches you with eyes that no longer trust, asks if you've changed the cook, asks if your maid's been acting strangely. He doesn't ask about himself, he would never blame his own indulgences. But he's looking now for fault, for someone to hold responsible. And you're always the most obvious answer. Then comes the visit from the bishop. You're given no warning. He arrives early in the morning with 2 attendants and the kind of smile that makes your stomach ache. He kisses your hand and tells you how lovely you look, how well kept your house is, how devoted you must be. You know what this is. It's not about faith, it's an inspection. He meets with your husband behind closed doors. You hear their voices. Low, steady, urgent. You're summoned to the chapel that afternoon. The bishop asks to see your prayer books. He wants to know what passages you read. He offers to hear your confession. You decline, saying you've already confessed this week. He smiles thinly. You know, lady, he says, spiritual rot often begins quietly, in the unseen corners of the soul. You think of the rot in your marriage, the rot in your bed. You say, yes, Father, I believe it. Historically, visits like this weren't unusual. The church inserted itself into noble households as both guide and spy. Wives were expected to be spiritual bastions, calm, obedient, faithful, Any sign of dissent, of nonconformity was suspect. Reading the wrong books, spending too much time alone, using herbs without clerical permission, all red flags. Even pregnancy, or the lack of it, was spiritualized. A fruitful womb was a sign of divine favour. A barren one meant sin, punishment, rebellion. And you haven't been pregnant in over a year. The bishop leaves after 2 days, but the damage is done. The servants are quieter. The chaplain walks the halls more often. Your husband suddenly insists you kneel beside him for evening prayers, though he used to sleep through half of them. He recites every passage loudly now, as if shouting God into the walls. You play along, but inside you begin to prepare, because you know what's coming. When they can't control a woman through marriage, they try to control her through morality. And when morality doesn't work, they reach for matches. So you re-hide the herbs. You memorize every verse they expect you to know. You dismiss one of your maids, too gossipy, and replace her with a quieter girl whose mother once worked for your family. You begin drafting a letter to your cousin in the north just in case you need a place to vanish. This is no longer about rebellion, it's about survival. And in this world, a clever woman doesn't wait for fire. She learns where the water is kept. You don't remember when your dress became a form of punishment. Somewhere along the way, the layers of fabric, linen, wool, velvet, bone, stopped being symbols of status and started feeling like traps sewn shut by duty. Every morning it takes 2 maids and a solid 20 minutes to wrap you in your appearance. The tight bodice, the heavy skirts, the sleeves so long they drag like extra limbs. Your collar pinches, your corset bites. You haven't taken a full breath since breakfast. Today it's all worse. The bishop's visit may be over, but the chill he left in the manor hasn't faded. Your husband's more alert than ever, policing your posture, your tone, your wardrobe. The yellow gown is too bright, he says over morning tea. And you've been wearing that green kirtle too often. It sends a message. He doesn't say what message. You know better than to ask. So now you stand still while your maid wrestles you into an ensemble that weighs more than your dignity. It's a rich burgundy dress, tight laced across your ribs with gold stitching at the hem. Beautiful in theory, but stitched like it was designed by someone who's never had to walk in it, sit in it, or breathe in it. The shoes are worse, pointed at the toes and made of leather so stiff you might as well be walking on carved wood. By the time you're fully dressed, your shoulders ache and your skin itches in 3 places you can't reach. You glance at your reflection in the polished brass mirror and see a lady of the manor, elegant, refined, composed. You don't see the bruises beneath the bodice. That's the cruelest part. Everyone calls fashion a luxury, but for women like you, it's a form of submission stitched into every seam. Each ribbon and clasp reminds the world that you are on display. A walking tapestry. Your body bound not just by law or marriage, but by fabric engineered to keep you still. Medieval fashion was as political as any treaty. A woman's dress communicated her family's wealth, her husband's status, her availability, or lack thereof. Modesty was enforced through fabric, chastity through design. You didn't wear what you liked. You wore what your husband approved. Or worse, what the church tolerated. And the church, these days, isn't tolerating much. You've been assigned a new spiritual advisor, a young pale-eyed priest who watches you too closely and speaks in verses. He comments on your gowns under the guise of concern. The neckline is a bit low, my lady. Modesty is the soul's mirror. You don't argue, you just nod, then excuse yourself to vomit quietly behind the chapel wall. The clothing isn't the only form of torture. Your hair must be covered, always. Some days it's a coif, other days a veil, and once a week, a stifling linen wimple that clings to your neck like a second skin. You're told it protects your virtue. You know it hides your expressions, your thoughts, yourself. And yet if you look too plain, you're accused of mourning something you haven't lost. Or worse, of attracting negative attention. A lady must reflect her household, your husband says, and a dour wife makes for a sour house. So you're stuck. You can't dress down. You can't dress freely. You can't dress comfortably. You can only dress appropriately, a word that changes with the wind and always means in a way that doesn't provoke male insecurity. One afternoon, during a formal visit from your husband's cousin, you faint. Not dramatically, not with gasping or sobbing. You simply go still, then sink slowly to the floor like a dropped cloak. You wake in your chamber, stripped to your shift, your maids hovering and pale. Too tight, one of them mutters, untying your stays. She couldn't breathe. No one apologizes. Instead, your husband blames you. You must learn to balance form and function, he says, as though you chose to wear a gown designed to crush your ribs. You embarrassed yourself. You nod. You always nod. But that night, while the maids are asleep, you take a knife from the kitchen and slip it into your sewing kit. You don't want to stab anyone, not yet. You just want options. The next time a corset is laced too tightly, you want to know you can end it. Quietly, efficiently. You begin practicing. Small changes at first. A looser seam here, a false hemline there. You teach yourself how to undo laces from the inside, how to breathe through boning, how to feign elegance while adjusting your bodice so it doesn't cut into your lungs. You hide needles in your sleeves, a seam ripper in your prayer book. You turn your own body into a survival toolkit. Because if you're going to be imprisoned in this dress, you might as well sharpen the bars. You also start paying attention to the other women. You notice how Lady Melisandre's shoes are always a half size too small, how she winces with every step but never says a word, how the steward's niece bruises beneath the leather straps of her girdle and tries to laugh it off, how the kitchen maid began binding her own chest after her master noticed her too much. Every woman is negotiating with fashion in her own way, and no one is allowed to admit it. One morning, while preparing for mass, your maid hesitates before lacing your stays. She looks at you wide-eyed and says, "Do you want it tight or do you want it safe?" You don't answer. You just take the laces from her and pull them yourself. That day you sit through the bishop's sermon with your back straight, your breathing even, and your spine unbroken. They all think it's because of your virtue. It's not. It's because you've turned your clothing into armour. And armour, unlike silk, is built for war. He doesn't die. That would be too clean, too penal, too narratively convenient. Instead, he becomes increasingly devout. Your husband, the man who once laughed at sermons and pinched chambermaids on feast days, now spends hours each week in the chapel, kneeling so hard the stones leave impressions in his knees. He fasts, he prays, he reads scripture aloud during meals, and corrects you when your posture slouches in the pews. At first, you think it's guilt, a brief flickering conscience brought on by illness and age. But then, the visits to the chapel turn into meetings with clergy. Then the meetings turn into letters sent to the bishop. And one morning over to breakfast, between a mouthful of the rye bread and a sip of watered wine, he says it. "I've been speaking with Father Emmerich about your spiritual condition." You freeze. The hearth crackles. A spoon clinks. He doesn't look at you. There's a place in the countryside, a convent, peaceful, well-run, known for taking in noble women who need stillness. Stillness. The word hits like a slap. And he goes on, not forever, of course, just for reflection. A retreat. Perhaps you'll return renewed. A better frame of mind, fewer distractions. He means obedience. He means sense. He means removal. You've heard of it happening. A nobleman whose wife became too proud or too willful or, God forbid, infertile might send her away to a convent. Officially it's temporary, spiritually motivated, a time of cleansing. But the truth is simpler. It's a polite exile, a marital broom closet, a way to dispose of wives who no longer serve their purpose without drawing too much blood. And once you're there, you don't come back. Or if you do, it's as a ghost of yourself, sapped, broken, pacified. No one listens to the woman who returns from cloistered prayer mumbling about incense and lost time. You're a warning, not a presence. You say nothing, not now, not here. You finish your bread and smile. That night, you lay awake as he snores beside you. You count your breaths. You make a list of friends who might shelter you, of servants who are loyal, of exits that are rarely guarded. You begin planning as if you've already been banished. Because you have, not physically, not yet, but the door has been opened. You're meant to walk through it gracefully as though it was your idea. Historically, noblewomen could be retired to convents for a variety of reasons. Some political, some personal, some disturbingly vague. Unruliness, barrenness, disobedience. There were even laws in certain regions allowing husbands to send wives away for spiritual correction if the clergy agreed. And the clergy, conveniently, almost always agreed. Because who would believe you? Who would side with the woman whispering through bars over the man in velvet robes with a donation envelope in hand? So you prepare. The first thing you do is visit the chapel alone. You kneel, you bow your head, you murmur prayers. But mostly you watch. You study the space, the priest's schedule, the location of the keys, the weakness in the lock on the east door. You don't need to escape the chapel, you just need to know how. Then you begin speaking to the servants, gently, strategically. You praise the cook's daughter, you give a coin to the stable boy with the broken tooth, you ask your old maid, the quiet one with the soft hands, how her knees are faring in the cold. They know what you're doing, but they let you do it, because some of them remember what the manor was like before you arrived, and some of them owe you. You've spent years being the quiet engine behind this household, and now that your husband has decided you're disposable, he's forgotten that even ghosts can pull strings. One afternoon you receive a letter. It's sealed with wax you don't recognise, and the handwriting is crooked but careful. Inside is a single sentence. There's room for you here, should you need it. No name, no place, just a message. But you understand, someone is watching, someone knows. You don't write back, you don't need to. What matters is that a door has been opened for you, not to trap you. The next step is subtle. You request to visit the convent early, just to see it. Your husband nods, pleased. He thinks you've surrendered. You smile sweetly and ask the steward to arrange the travel. He sends you with 2 guards and a covered carriage. You do not run, not yet. The convent is quiet, cloistered, full of dim light and careful steps. The nuns move like whispers. They speak gently in riddles and scripture. You recognize the strategy. It's the same one you use. Grace as a blade, humility as armor. The abbess greets you. She seems kind, but behind her kindness is steel. We encourage obedience here, she says. Silence, reflection, the stripping of ego. You nod. You keep nodding. And when she asks if you'll be joining them soon, you say, perhaps. You leave before sunset. The next day your husband asks what you thought of the place, and you say, it's beautiful. He smiles. Then we'll arrange for your stay. And just like that, your sentence is handed down. No trial, no argument, just polite phrasing and spiritual pretense. That night you sit by the fire in the solar and write a letter. It isn't long, it doesn't include names or dates. Just 3 words, it's happening soon. You fold it into a piece of linen and place it in the bottom of the steward's niece's sewing basket. She'll know where to send it. You made sure of that weeks ago. Then you return to your chamber, unlace your gown and look at yourself in the mirror. You look like a woman prepared for piety. But underneath, you're dressed for war. The day of your departure arrives with the kind of gentle weather that ought to accompany a wedding procession, not a soft exile. The sky is blue, the air is crisp, and there's a slight breeze that tugs at the edges of your veil as though it's trying to say something. You let it. You're past pretending to control the elements. Today isn't about control. It's about the performance of surrender. Your husband stands beside the carriage, dressed in dark wool with his best belt, the one with the polished silver buckle that he only wears when he wants people to remember how much he owns. He doesn't speak much, just gestures for you to climb in. His hand brushes your arm as you pass, and you feel the ghost of past bruises beneath your sleeve. They've faded, but not forgotten. Nothing is forgotten. Inside the carriage is quiet. No guards inside with you, just 2 outside. One driving, one riding behind on horseback. They don't speak either. That's part of the show. You're not being dragged. You're being escorted. A lady wrapped in velvet, eyes down, hands folded in silent gratitude for her opportunity to become a better version of herself. The trip takes most of the day. You watch the fields blur past through the small slit of window in the wooden frame. Barley, wheat, crows pecking at dry patches, a bent-backed farmer who doesn't look up. You could be going anywhere at all, but you're not. You're going to the convent, the place where difficult wives are dusted off like books no one reads anymore, where young girls are buried under plain linen and renamed Sister Something, where silence is mistaken for holiness and compliance is the highest virtue. The convent appears at dusk, a cluster of stone buildings hugging the hilltop like gossipers in prayer. It's quiet, always quiet, no laughter, no singing, just the sound of distant bells and the careful sweep of feet across worn stone. As you step from the carriage, the abbess greets you again. Her face is serene. Her hands are folded. She's the kind of woman who makes you feel like you're already disappointing God just by existing. You'll be given your own chamber, she says, till your spirit settles. Then we'll find your rhythm. Her voice is sweet. Her tone is final. Your chamber is small. 1 narrow window, 1 straw mattress. A wooden cross above the door that leans slightly to the left. Your belongings are reduced to a single trunk. A few gowns, a brush, and the prayer book your husband insisted you bring. You're not permitted letters, not permitted jewellery, not permitted mirrors. You were expecting this. Still, the emptiness settles in your chest like sand. No more morning walks, no more solar, no more pretending to be in charge of your own household. You're back where you began. A girl in someone else's care, waiting to be reshaped into something acceptable. But here's the thing they've forgotten. You are not the girl they married. You are the woman they tried to erase, and she's tired of pretending. The first week is observation. The nuns keep their distance but take careful notes. Who you speak to, how often you eat, whether you kneel or hesitate before entering the chapel. You kneel, of course, you pray when watched. You eat slowly, deliberately, with your eyes lowered and your hands still. You are the perfect penitent. And every night, after the bells stop ringing, you lie awake in your narrow bed and recite your plan like a bedtime prayer. On the 10th day you begin planting seeds. Not literal ones, though you do spend time in the convent garden, hoeing soil and pretending to care about rosemary. No, the seeds you plant are made of suggestion. You compliment the novice with the limp and ask gently about her injury. She blushes and says she fell in the stables. You glance at the older nun behind her and say, "I suppose some of us fall harder than others." The older nun doesn't respond, but she hears you. You kneel beside the cook one afternoon while peeling onions and mutter, "My husband never ate these unless I made them first. He said no one else got the spice right." You watch her side-eye you, half curious, half cautious. You pretend to forget the order of Mass just once, letting another nun correct you with the sharp edge of condescension. Then the next day, you correct her misquote of a psalm. Nicely, sweetly, but in front of others. You aren't making friends, you're making cracks. Historically, convents were not peaceful havens so much as powder kegs. Packed with women who'd been silenced elsewhere, they often became hotbeds of quiet resistance. Petty rivalries, secret lovers, misplaced letters, stolen wine. The nuns who survived longest weren't the most devout, they were the most observant. And you are a very, very good observer. By week 3, you have learned the following. Sister Adeline drinks from the communion wine after evening Mass. The abbess receives letters from your husband and does not always show them to the rest of the order. The chapel door lock is rusted and could be opened with a bent spoon. And, most importantly, the healer you once trusted has a cousin who delivers root vegetables to the convent every Thursday. You recognise the mark on the crate, so you do something bold and you leave a note, just a slip of parchment folded into the hem of the sackcloth apron he always takes back with him. You keep it short. Soon, watch the southern road. No name, no signature. If he's still loyal, he'll understand. That night you sleep soundly for the first time in weeks. Not because you're safe, but because you're no longer alone. The next morning the abbess calls you into her chamber. She's holding a letter. It's sealed in red wax. "Your husband writes with concern," she says, eyes narrowed. "He wishes to know whether you are improving." You smile. "Tell him," you say, "that I'm quieter than I've ever been." She seems satisfied. And you are too. Because silence in your hands is not submission, it's strategy. You know the escape will have to happen on a Thursday. It's the only day the convent doors are opened without questions. The vegetable delivery arrives before dawn, and the nuns assigned to help with unloading are the same every week. Sister Beatrix, who has arthritis and moves slowly, and Sister Alva, who sings while working and never counts the sacks. The driver, a gaunt man with sunburnt skin and hands like rope, barely speaks. He keeps his eyes down. He does his job. If the cart leaves with one extra sack, no one will look twice. So you've timed it all, practiced it, rehearsed the turns in your mind like liturgy. You even know what you'll wear, the plainest shift you own, dyed grey with boiled walnut husks. No rings, no brooches, nothing to glint in the light. You've cut your hair short, just enough to tuck under a travelling cap. You did it with sewing shears in the dark, each snip feeling like a tiny rebellion. You buried the trimmings in the garden under a patch of dying thyme. By Wednesday night, your nerves buzz like a wasp trapped under your ribs. You eat slowly at dinner. Too slowly. You catch the abbess watching you. You smile. "I'm fasting tomorrow," you say softly, "for spiritual clarity." She nods. You don't sleep that night. You lie in bed with your eyes open, listening to the distant shuffle of feet, the occasional thump of the wind against the shutters, The creak of the elder nun's bones 2 chambers down. The convent is never truly silent, it just pretends to be. At dawn you rise. No bell has rung yet. That's good. You dress quickly, fold your night shift under the mattress, press your feet into the old leather slippers you stole from the laundry 2 weeks ago. They're 2 sizes too big, but they'll pass. You cover your head with a linen wrap and wait by the cloister arch until you hear the cartwheels grind across gravel. Sister Beatrix is already there, bent at the waist, fumbling with a sack of turnips. The driver gives her a cursory nod and returns to the cart. You walk toward them like you belong there. No eye contact, no hesitation, just rhythm, and then you hear it. "Lady?" It's not loud, it's not a shout. It's just enough to slice the air. You turn slowly. It's Sister Thera, the one who rarely speaks, who reads from a broken psalter and smiles at spiders. She stands halfway down the corridor, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles are pale. She looks at you with something close to sadness, or pity, or admiration. You can't tell. You meet her eyes, you don't speak, neither does she. Then she bows her head and turns away. You climb into the cart. The sack is half full, root vegetables, bundled cloth, a stale loaf of bread. You squeeze yourself down beside it and pull the covering over your head. You count your heartbeats. You listen as the cart creaks forward. 1 slow turn, 2 bumps, a pause, then the unmistakable grind of the outer gate opening. You're outside. No bells ring, no shouts follow. No one pulls the cloth from your head and calls you sinner. You're not discovered. Not yet. The cart moves steadily south for nearly an hour. The man doesn't speak. He doesn't even look back. Eventually he stops near a creek bed and taps the side of the cart twice. That's your signal. You sit up slowly, stretch your aching legs, and climb down. The sky is pale, the road empty. He hands you a satchel, bread, a small flask of wine, and a folded cloak. You nod in thanks. He doesn't ask your name, he just says, "There's a horse tethered 2 miles east, behind the red stone chapel. You ride from there." You nod again. You begin walking. It feels surreal at first, the way freedom always does. Unreal, unsteady, stitched together with disbelief. Every sound makes you jump. Every shadow could be a soldier, a priest, a message from your husband, warning others to watch for a runaway wife in widow's grey. But no one stops you. No one sees you. The countryside is quiet, and you begin to breathe again. When you reach the chapel, the horse is there just as promised. A scrappy grey mare with patient eyes and burrs in her mane. You mount without ceremony and ride hard until the sky begins to change. By dusk, you've crossed into forest, and in the forest you find the house. It's not a grand manor or a guarded keep, just a cottage tucked into a slope between trees, with a crooked chimney and herbs drying from the windows. The door creaks as you approach, and before you can knock, it opens. It's the healer. Older now, thinner, but still sharp-eyed. She doesn't gasp or cross herself or ask if you've sinned. She just steps aside and says, "Come in." The inside smells of lavender and smoke. A pot simmers on the hearth. Books line the walls, not just religious texts, but real books. You see one about astronomy, one on poisons, one bound in leather so old the title's long worn off. You don't speak. You just sink into the chair she gestures toward. "I expected you weeks ago," she says, handing you a mug of something bitter. "I had to finish pretending first." She nods. "Are you safe here?" you ask finally. "As safe as we can be." You sip the tea. It burns, but in a good way. Later you eat by the fire. Real food. Hot. Unblessed. Honest. You change into a brown robe with no laces, no corset, no pinching sleeves. You wash your face and you stare at your reflection in a bowl of water and barely recognize yourself. You look older, tired, but real. The healer shows you to a bed. Simple, clean. You lie down and exhale like you haven't in years. You made it. But survival isn't the end. It's the start of something else. And you know this won't be the last door you walk through? Because women like you don't vanish. You return. The forest doesn't forgive easily, but it forgets quickly. Within days, the shape of your old life has faded into mist and pine needles, swallowed up by the stillness between trees. The cottage becomes your new centre. Days are measured not by bells or duties, but by how long the fire stays lit and how loud the wind is at night. There are no prayers here, except the kind whispered by the trees when it rains. You sleep without laces digging into your ribs. You eat without praying over each crust of bread. You speak without measuring every word against someone else's anger. And yet you are not free, not fully, not yet. Because freedom isn't just distance, and it's unlearning. You wake each morning with your jaw clenched, your body still expecting orders. You find yourself waiting for the sound of your name barked in command. When no one calls, you half expect punishment. When it never comes, a strange emptiness sets in. Who are you when no one is watching? The healer watches you differently. She doesn't ask what you ran from, she doesn't need to. She teaches you the names of herbs you have only ever seen in the margins of prayer books. Marigold, foxglove, skullcap. She lets you crush roots and grind dried leaves with your own hands. This is the kind that heals, she says. This is the kind that kills. Best to know both. You never know which you'll need. You nod. She gives you space. But you notice that she locks the cupboard when she sleeps. Smart woman. You try to remember who you were before the wedding veil. Before the heavy sleeves and the title, and the cold gaze of a man who saw you as furniture with a womb. You dig through your own mind like a chest full of damp letters. There are things you still remember. The name of your childhood dog, the colour of the thread your mother used to mend your socks, the sound of snow hitting the eaves of your childhood home. You hold on to those pieces like charms. One afternoon you venture farther into the woods than before. You find a stream, a clearing, and a cluster of mushrooms growing in the shade of an old stump. You sit for a while watching the water move. It doesn't rush. It doesn't need to. It moves without apology. You wonder what it would be like to live that way. The healer gives you work to do, not busy work, but tasks with meaning. You learn to stitch wounds and bind sprains. You help deliver a calf in the rain. You burn your fingers trying to boil sap into syrup and laugh, really laugh, for the first time in months. One night she pours 2 mugs of honey wine and says, "What was his name?" You don't answer, not because you can't, because you don't want to give him oxygen in this place. This is a place of healing, and he is rot. She nods like she understands. Historically, women like you didn't get to stay hidden long. Runaway brides, disgraced wives, accused heretics, someone always came looking. Often it wasn't a knight or a husband, but a priest, bearing a scroll and a seal and a well-practiced frown. The church rarely liked it when women disappeared. Especially the ones who knew too much. Especially the ones who survived. You're expecting someone to come. A message. A search party. A blade. But weeks pass and nothing comes. No horse hooves, no scrolls, no letters wrapped in ribbon. Just quiet. Too quiet. You start to wonder, did he send someone and they never found you? Or did he decide you weren't worth the effort? The healer sees the tension in your shoulders and says, "It doesn't matter. If they come, we'll know. If they don't, you're free." But freedom, you say, doesn't feel like anything yet. It will. You believe her, mostly. And then one evening there's a little knock. Not loud, not frantic, just a single measured rap at the door. You both freeze. The healer reaches for her walking stick. You reach for the blade you now keep under the edge of the table. You glance at each other. She nods. You open the door. It's not your husband. It's a girl, no older than 17, thin, ragged, barefoot. Her eyes are wide and wet and wild. She looks past you into the cottage, then back at you. "I heard you help women," she says. "I heard you were one of us." Your breath catches. You step aside. She walks in. You feed her, wrap her in a wool cloak, let her sleep near the hearth. You don't ask her story. She offers it anyway. Her Lord touched her. More than once. Her father called her a liar. Her priest called her God's test. She ran. You listen. When she's done, you say only one thing. You did the right thing. Her face breaks, like glass relieved to finally shatter. The healer takes her into the back room, prepares herbs, bandages, a bath. You stare into the fire and realize that this is what freedom feels like. Not peace, not escape, purpose. And suddenly, the air in your chest expands. You don't know how many women are out there like her, like you, but you know how to find them now, and you know how to help. You won't return to the manor. You won't kneel in that chapel. You won't bow to a man who claims your soul as his property. You will stay here, and when the next girl knocks, you'll open the door again, and again, and again, until the woods are filled with the sound of women rebuilding themselves. One life at a time. Winter comes early that year, biting into the hills with sharp winds and thick snow, as if the land itself wants to cleanse away the year that came before. You don't mind. The cold wraps around the cottage like a blanket you didn't ask for but somehow needed. The forest is quieter now. blanketed in stillness. But inside something is stirring. The girl, her name is Ellen, stays. You weren't sure she would. Some girls run until they reach the sea. Others keep moving just to stay ahead of the ghosts, but Ellen roots herself. She's quick to learn, clumsy with herbs, sharp with words. You catch her laughing at her own jokes while hauling firewood and once humming a wedding song she quickly apologises for. "I didn't mean to," she says. You wave it off. There's no such thing as sin in this house anymore, only memory. Ellen becomes your shadow. She watches the way you test the weight of dried herbs in your palm, how you crush seeds with your thumb, how you taste bitter tea without flinching. "Were you always this calm?" she asks one morning while peeling bark. You laugh. "No, but I'm very good at pretending." The healer doesn't say much these days. She's older than you'd thought, slower, but her eyes are sharp as flint. She still teaches you everything, still tests you without warning, still says things like, "You're not ready," even when you think you are. But you can feel the balance shifting. She lets you answer the door now, lets you mix potions alone. Once, she even let you stitch a wound while she watched from her chair, nodding slowly. And the girls keep coming. Some arrive with bruises, some with lies they've memorized too well, some with nothing but frostbitten fingers and a look that says they've run out of places to go. You never ask questions. You make soup. You find them clothes. You offer them a cot in the loft and the kind of silence that doesn't need to be explained. One, a merchant's daughter named Isabel, brings books with her. Real books. Philosophy, healing texts, even a volume of erotic poetry she hides in the flour barrel. You nearly choke laughing when you find it. "They burned this where I'm from," she says, grinning, "so I learned it by heart first." She reads aloud sometimes at night, and you all laugh and Ellen blushes, and the healer shakes her head like she's pretending to be offended. This is not what they pictured when they imagined the fate of a wayward bride. Historically, women who escaped their roles were not honoured. They were erased. Their stories turned to cautionary tales or buried entirely. And yet, despite the silence of official records, pockets of resistance existed. Informal networks of women who helped each other disappear. Midwives who turned healers, healers who turned leaders. It wasn't always open rebellion. Sometimes it was just a cottage in the woods with unlocked doors. Sometimes it was exactly what you're living now. You start keeping notes, not for posterity, not for history, but for the girls. You write their names in code, their stories in metaphors only you understand. You keep the ledger hidden behind the hearth. Not because you expect anyone to come looking for it, but because old habits die hard. Every now and then a rider passes near the cottage. A lone man with a travelling cloak. A pair of clergy walking together. Once a knight. You duck low behind the curtains, heart thudding, memories rattling the walls like wind. But they never stop, not yet. Still all, you prepare. The healer shows you how to trap doors from the inside, how to poison wine that only stuns, not kills, how to vanish in less than 10 minutes, should the cottage be compromised. She's old, but she's not soft. She's lived too long to believe in perfect safety. "You'll need to lead when I'm gone," she says one night, staring into her tea. You open your mouth to protest, but she raises a hand. "Don't argue, just be ready." You nod. And you are. Because now you're not just someone who escaped a nightmare. You're someone who understands how the nightmare works, how it breathes, how it grows in silence and shame and scripture. You've studied it, survived it, and now you're building something that can outlive it. Not a revolution, not a rebellion, a refuge. One evening, as the fire crackles and the snow thickens outside, Ellen asks, "Do you think you'll ever go back?" The question takes you by surprise. You don't answer right away. You think of the manor, the cold halls, the look on your husband's face when he decided your value had expired. You think of the bishop and the priest and the way they all pretended to be saving your soul while trying to smother it. You shake your head. "No," you say. "There's nothing left to go back to." But that's not entirely true, is it? There are still other women, trapped behind thick stone walls, dressed like dolls, marched down aisles and tied to men who see them as livestock. Some will stay forever. Some will never know there's a way out. But some are just waiting for a door. And you've become the one who builds them. You teach Ellen how to read, Isabel how to brew, another girl how to defend herself with a fire poker. They're not weapons yet, but they're sharpening. The healer watches from her chair, a faint smile in her eyes. "You're ready," she says one morning. You blink. "For what?" She shrugs. "Whatever comes next." And then, one quiet dawn, she's gone. No ceremony, no drama, just a cold cup of tea and a note. It's yours now. You bury her beneath the yew tree. Ellen helps. You plant lavender over her grave. The air is still. No prayers, just gratitude. And from that day forward, it's your cottage, your refuge and your legacy. You're not just a runaway bride anymore. You're the one they whisper about. The one who opens the door. The one who says, "You're not broken. You're just beginning." And somewhere far away, another girl laces up her wedding dress with shaking hands and starts to imagine a world beyond the veil. A world where women like you are waiting and building and watching. You made it. Not in the way people think of survival. This wasn't the kind where you escape from dragons or storms or flaming arrows. It was slower, quieter, more insidious, and more real. Because being a medieval bride, it wasn't just a ceremonial trap cloaked in lace and hymns. It was a full-body surrender signed in ink and blood. A slow erasure, a daily undoing. But you lived. You weren't supposed to. Statistically, historically, spiritually, you probably weren't meant to last more than a few years in that manner. Between the childbirth dangers, the church's control, the impossible demands of obedience and silence, your odds were thinner than the veil they dropped over your face on your wedding day. And yet somehow, here you are. Older now. Wiser. Not necessarily gentler, but you've learnt the kind of gentleness that comes with boundaries, with knowing when to say no and when to disappear altogether. You're no longer a bride, you're not even a runaway anymore. You've become the ending no one expected. A healer, a protector, a secret tucked into the woods where broken things are allowed to heal instead of being discarded. And the girls keep coming, they'll always keep coming, as long as there are systems that treat women like currency. As long as someone believes a woman's worth ends at the altar. As long as the world still thinks silence equals peace. But now they have somewhere to go. They have you, and maybe that's the legacy you've built, quietly in your own name. Not castles, not titles, not bloodlines. Just freedom. Shared, passed down, whispered from one door to the next. So if someone ever asks, what happened to that lady, the one who vanished? The one who was supposed to die in obedience? Let them guess. Let them make up stories. And let the real story be this. She lived. She helped others live. And she never, ever asked permission again.